Okay, welcome to the July 16th, 2020 meeting of the Walnut Creek Transportation Commission. This meeting is being held in accordance with the Brown Act as currently in effect under the State Emergency Services Act, the Governor's Emergency Declaration related to COVID-19, and the Governor's Executive Order N-2920, issued March 17th, 2020, that allows attendance by members of the Commission, city staff, and the public to participate and conduct the meeting by video conference. Video conference locations are not open to the public. As some attendees may be participating in their first Walnut Creek Transportation Commission meeting or their first teleconference meeting, I want to welcome everyone and talk briefly about the public comment process. To provide a live remote public comment, join the Zoom video conference meeting. The meeting ID is 923-389-3004, and the password is 304833. When I open the public comment period, use the raise hand feature or press *9 if you are connected by phone, which will alert the staff that you have a public comment you would like to provide. Please wait your turn, and once brought to the meeting, we would appreciate if you would please state your name and the city of residence for the record. Consistent with the transportation's rules of orders, each speaker will have 3 minutes to make their remarks. Should you choose not to provide comments but would like to view the meeting, you may do so in one of the following ways. YouTube Live. Visit the city's YouTube channel, cable broadcast, Comcast 28, Incorporated Walnut Creek only, Rossmore Channel 26, Wave Channel 29, and AT&T UVerse Channel 99. Finally, live stream online on the city's website. Chair, could you read the roll?
Yes, happy to. Commissioner Milks, please say here. Present. Commissioner Cagill.
Present.
Commissioner Ash.
Present.
Commissioner Salcido.
Present.
And Chair or Vice Chair, Acting Chair German.
Here.
Present and accounted for.
I would also like to welcome new Commissioner Jamie Salcido to our first meeting. Would you like to say a word or two about being on the commission?
Sure. I am really excited to be able to serve the city of Walnut Creek as a transportation commissioner. I live in sort of the Northgate area of Walnut Creek and have also lived in closer to the Larkey Park area prior to living here, and have walked to BART and have been a car commuter and have walked to a number of different places in Walnut Creek. So I've experienced Walnut Creek from a variety of different modes of transportation, and am excited to get involved.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, this is a section for public communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for comment on items not on the agenda. Under the Brown Act, the Commission Act cannot act on items raised during public communications, but may respond briefly to statements made or questions posed, request clarification, or refer the item to staff. Does any member of the public wish to comment on any item not on the agenda? please use the raise hand feature or press star 9 if you are connected by phone. If you would like to provide a public comment at this time, I will ask the secretary if there are any members of the public who would like to provide comments.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have one commenter. Wait for Matt to shut his door there. Okay, sorry, a little bit of feedback. We have one person in the queue wishing to comment, and I also have a letter that's been submitted for the public communication. The Revelry Gary. Here we go. Let me get this mouse to work. Now, oh, sorry, I have 3 computer mice here. I have to make sure to use the right one. Okay, ask Revelry Gary to unmute, and we can start. We have for 3-minute comment. Revelry Gary doesn't seem to be responding. I'll tell you what, I will read the letter that's been submitted that'll allow Revelry Gary a chance to submit their comment. Also in keeping with the rules of order adopted by the City Council for the commissions, I will actually start the timer while I'm reading the letter. If time runs out before I finish reading the letter, I'll stop reading. So it's just like somebody submitting comments in person. So I will go ahead and start this letter. Make sure I get the right mouse again. This letter is from Bill Retberg. And let me start here. Okay, I am William Bill Retberg, PE, and I live at 2250 English Court in the Scottsdale area of Northeast Walnut Creek. I'm also a former member of the Walnut Creek Transportation Commission. We have lived in our current address since 1992. I want the Transportation Commission to examine the excessive noise, speeding, and racing on Ignacio Valley Road. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I've been working from home in a bedroom facing YVR and have suffered extreme noise from racing motorcycles and cars in our area during the days and evenings. Further, I have seen lots of speeding vehicles and have observed cars actually racing each other. All this has diminished the peace and safety of our neighborhood. I have been in contact with my neighbors and others through Nextdoor and getting validation from my observations along YVR. Everyone agrees that there's need for action. When I was on the Transportation Commission, we worked with the community on a number of traffic calming projects, including the first roundabout in the city near Northgate High School. At the time, we brought the community together to address speeding and disregard of stop signs. It is my opinion that there are a number of steps the city needs to take to consider including signage that YVR transects residential areas, hospitals, etc., and that there are ordinances about excessive vehicle noise. I would like the Walnut Creek Police and perhaps the Contra Costa Sheriff to patrol, stop, and ticket drivers racing. When I was in the Army National Guard MP training in Georgia, they calmed the traffic on the base by simply parking idle police vehicles near busy intersections. Cameras might be another mitigation measure to warn drivers and calm traffic. Finally, I think the city should reconsider the use of sound walls to mitigation noise in our area. I would like to address the Transportation Commission at a meeting and ask for a vetting of our concerns and develop a plan for some actions to address significant safety and quality of life issue in our area of the city. Thank you. I can be reached. He leaves his phone number and email address. I look forward to getting on the agenda and addressing the commission. Signed, Bill Retberg. And I've just been informed that the other speaker has disconnected. So that's let me double check the inbox, make sure no other messages have come in. No, that concludes our public comments or public communication.
Okay. Next on the agenda is the adoption of the January 16th, 2020 minutes. Does any member of the public wish to comment on the adoption of minutes? Please use the raise hand feature or star 9 if you're connected by audio only. If you would like to provide public comment. At this time, I will ask the secretary if there are any members of the public who would like to comment.
There are no people wishing to speak on this item.
Okay. So would anybody like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
Moved.
Seconded?
I'll second that motion.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And with Mr. Chair, if you could ask if there was any opposed.
I don't see anybody else.
Didn't see anybody. Okay. And just for clarity, the motion was made by Commissioner Ash and seconded by Milks.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda for the Yard Commission considerations. The first one is a new chair. Do we have any nominations? Yes, Danny?
I would like to nominate David German for the chair.
Again,
Mr. Chair, if there's no comment, I'd be happy to take a roll call on that.
Okay,
I assume you consent to the nomination.
I-
Thank you. So Commissioner Milks,
Aye.
Commissioner Cagle,
Aye.
Commissioner Ash,
aye.
Commissioner Salcido,
Aye.
and Vice Chair German.
aye.
Passes 5-0, and under normal circumstances, I would take the chair nameplate and move it over into in front of your seat, but you're not here. So we'll do it in spirit.
I slid a piece of it over to one side here. I believe that our next piece of business is vice chair.
Correct.
I would like to nominate Danny Mills.
I would
Is
second.
there?
Sure.
That was
Presume you're-
Was the second by Commissioner Cagle?
Yes,
Go ahead and take the vote, Commissioner, or was there any comment before I take the vote?
I presume Danny wants the vice chair.
Does he want it?
Correct.
Okay, so Commissioner Milks,
Aye.
Commissioner Cagle,
Aye.
Commissioner Ash,
Aye.
Commissioner Salcido,
Aye.
and Chair German.
Aye.
5-0. Okay, we have a new chair and vice chair. Congratulations and thank you.
Congratulations, gentlemen.
Thank you. Okay, item 5B, the downtown parking sensor install update. Staff will provide an update on parking sensors that were installed last March in most of the metered parking spots and commercial loading zones in downtown. This update will describe the available parking sensor data and how it is monitored for insights. Future project consideration will also be discussed. Do we have some staff?
Yes, we do, and we're bringing Matt in. There he is.
So it looks like I cannot share because I'm host disabled this.
Okay, let's see if I can fix that.
Okay, it looks like it's
Now you can.
available. Thanks. And happy to join everyone tonight. Nice to see the familiar faces and welcome the new member. Okay, so are we seeing, let's see. We see the screen, the presentation?
Yes.
Great. So yeah, this is kind of a complement to that agenda item of the staff report for the downtown parking sensors that were recently expanded on and installed. So let's jump right in. So if you've ever been, to provide some context, if you've ever been driving through a city looking for an empty parking spot and just wondering if there's an app or something you could look at to find where exactly to drive and park there. That's kind of the technology we're going to be talking about tonight. So we'll cover the technology, we'll cover the pilot installation and then the recent expansion, and we'll talk about some of the findings with the data, and then we'll talk about the possible next steps. So here are the sensors. These are embedded in the ground. They're created from a company called Frog Parking, who's actually based out of New Zealand. They can also be surface mounted for like bridges. We have a couple of those that we mounted on the bridges that you can see in the bottom left here, and they're battery powered. So they provide parking occupancy data, basically telling if a car is there or not. They can also tell duration, how long a car has been there, and they can give us a turnover of vehicles. So all these sensors communicate to a pole-mounted gateway. So you can see here on the top right, picture of one on the pole. We have about 68 of them. And they're solar panel, they're solar powered, and the antenna on the bottom there talk to multiple sensors in the ground, and then they talk through cellular out to the frog parking dashboard. So it's a cloud-based dashboard, it's a website, and from there we can look at graphs about how this data functions, and then we can look at maps, and we can also pull reports. So the reports can be broken up into time and day. We can also draw zones around particular sensors if we're interested in a certain area. And here you can see a picture of a map with some of the recently done pop-ups excluded from the parking zones. And then we can look at the health of the sensors and the gateways and make sure that they're still functional. So in the summer of 2019, the city installed about 116 of these just on Main Street. So you can see the yellow and green dots. So this allowed us to just test the technology, make sure it was functional, and then we could explore their dashboard. And we could also make sure that their latency and vehicle accuracy detection met our requirements. And they did. So recently here in March, just before shelter in place, we did an expansion. So here's the current view of the number of sensors. And there's a little bit more outside this, but you get the idea. So we have about 1,100 sensors covering about 80% of our metered parking. This includes Lot A, which you can see on the bottom, Lot C, many of the purple pole metered spots, and we included like non-metered spaces such as commercial loading zones and passenger loading zones. So some of the findings, it's interesting to pull this data and look at how some of our existing signage corresponds to actual usage. So with this data, we can actually know, what's going on. So let's take a look at the commercial loading zones where we have 20-minute limits between 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. So in June, we actually saw that as an average of about 24 minutes from that time period. So that's a whole month of June. And we are in shelter in place, so this may not be the most accurate data, but you can tell that there's a little bit of a difference there. The passenger loading zones, according to our Muni code, we only allow 3 minutes. And for those locations, our sensor data shows about an average duration of about 25 minutes. So there's a big differential there. So same for ADA parking. There's actually unlimited limits for parking there. But if we look at just the Main Street section with just the 2 spots that are on Main there, that's why there's the asterisk. We have 56 minutes average. This was back in October. And then more recently, we see that down a little bit to 46 minutes for those same regions. And then recently for the Rebound program, David, do you have a question?
No.
Recently for the Rebound program, we've implemented the curbside pickup. So that allows for 15 minutes. And in June, that was about 28 minutes. So there's a little bit of disconnect about how those spots are used. And then just the regular green poles, the previously 2-hour limit. In October, that was about 60 minutes on average for the Main Street section. And then now it's about 53 minutes. And that's typical of what we're seeing. We're seeing an average either purple pole or the downtown core at about 50 minutes of average duration. So we can just kind of see the effectiveness of these different uses with these sensors. And for the final slide, this is kind of talking about and exploring kind of the next steps of what we can do now. Not every city, in fact, it's pretty rare to have parking sensors. So expanding, our existing parking sensor suite, we could install the rest of the metered parking spaces. That's another 300 spaces or so. And then there's the Civic Park lot, which is actually an uncharged lot that has 3-hour limits. By putting these sensors down, we could kind of understand the behavior, what's going on there. And then with our pilot, we integrated with Smarking so that we could actually tell what people paid with the meter and then if a car was actually there. So this is the graph on the top right, where we can see the differential between what people paid and then if the car was actually there. And I highlighted a week in February here where you can see there was a holiday, and so we don't collect payment, so the green line is flat, but we still see the regular pattern of people actually occupying those spaces. So having those comparisons is pretty helpful. And so we're planning to integrate the expansion suite into Smarking as well to compare to our transaction data from the meter. We also have some Bluetooth sensors in the downtown region. So pulling any travel time information from those could also be interesting to overlay with the parking data. And then the city of Laguna Beach in Southern California has an app. And so they have like a dedicated app for residents or visitors to install, and they can tell where some available parking is. Unfortunately, the app has pretty low ratings, but there could be some sort of public-facing website or phone app that gives people this sensor information data so that they can kind of determine where to park. And the garages can be tied into that app so that you can rate based on payment and availability about where you want to park. So that's kind of all, and I'll kind of open it up for any questions or comments, or let the secretary deal with that.
Actually, I would want to add to your presentation by saying that I personally have already been making use, or I should say I professionally have been personally making use of the sensors during the COVID crisis in terms of gauging occupancy of the downtown parking spaces when we're discussing our Rebound program with regards to turning the meters back on and other things that affect the downtown parking. So it's been a very helpful tool for staff.
Okay, we call for public comment first, right?
Correct. Do we have any public comment? We have no public comment on this.
Does any of the commission have any comments to make?
And this is just an informational item. But if you have any questions or comments, it'd be welcome.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. Bear with me, I have an IT background before I was retired. Do the sensors, obviously don't have a camera, but can they identify in any way a vehicle's in the parking spot?
Like the size or type of vehicle?
Specifically the vehicle. Can they identify it at all?
No, I've talked to them about can they measure trucks versus like a small car or mid-sized car, and they said that they can't do that. So there's definitely no way to measure or detect individual's car or track any kind of car. It's a simple sensor.
So your last bullet asks your answer to the question I had about them being or not being in the garages. Why weren't they installed in the garages to begin with?
They're not in the garages. The garages have gates at the entries and exit, so we can kind of tell what's going on there based on how full it is. But installing these in the garages, and it's just more spaces. We kind of already have some information from those.
It seems like a great idea to have an app that can tell you if parking is full or not. How soon is that going to happen?
A timeline, I mean, I'd say 8 to 12 months. There is a lot of development to go along. I mean, depending what route exactly we take. I mean, a website I think would be quicker than an app, but based on the reviews of that frog parking based app in Laguna Beach, I think we have to be careful about how we go about a dedicated app for one use.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions?
I was just wondering if it detects very small vehicles such as scooters, motorcycles. Would those be detected in a parking space?
Yeah, so as you saw, it's a little circular device. So I think if a motorcycle, something heavier like that, was right over it, they would be detected. Something like a scooter, maybe if it's right over it. Something like a bike, maybe not. They do have some sort of algorithm in there to make sure that it's actually a car over it. It's a magnet basically, and so it has to have enough metal. Some of these are used at intersections for detection, but not these exact ones, but that technology. So I know motorcycles can be detected, but it depends on their threshold. So it doesn't matter how close they are to the sensor and stuff.
And it sounds like the data is available in real time.
Yeah, they do have a real-time feature. I mean, it may be, I think there's a few seconds delay, but yeah, it's real time.
And is it being used at all by law enforcement for ticketing purposes?
Great question. Yeah, so this is purely internal for kind of the traffic and the planning team. No one in PD has access. Frog Parking does have modules for enforcement, but we're not really pursuing those at this time, and we are keeping it internal to traffic engineering, essentially.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to seeing the data that we get moving forward.
Yeah, thanks.
Jared, have we been able to use this data to identify how long somebody is searching for a parking space and identify ways to reduce the amount of times they're circling the block?
Great question. So no, not directly, but there's kind of this magic number in parking for like 85%, where if you keep that threshold, occupancy threshold or below, you should basically have at least one space per block. Right now with COVID, we're pretty good in certain areas at certain times, I should say. The pop-ups have really taken a couple spaces. But no, we don't have like exact delay that it causes people searching for parking. That is an interesting point, and that's something maybe along the lines with that Bluetooth integration to determine if you have slow speeds and high occupancies on a certain street, you know, what's going on there.
Thanks.
Annie or Sam, do you have any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, item 5C is downtown parking rate increases. On July 7th, 2020, the City Council approved the Downtown Parking Enterprise and Enhancement Fund Parking Fund budget for the fiscal year, FY 2021. The budget assumes the city's parking management program will solely face back to the status quo for a 4-month period and includes an increase to the hourly parking rate in the city's 3 parking garages from 50 cents to $1.25 an hour. Section 3, 5, 10, 47 of the Walnut Creek Municipal Code gives the Transportation Commission the authority to set parking rates for the city's garages. Staff recommends that the Transportation Commission approve the budgeted parking rate increase. And there's Carla. Would you like to report?
Good evening. I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see that? All right.
Yeah.
So good evening, everyone. It is great to be with you. Wish we could be in person, but via Zoom. You all look great. Item before you, as the chair said, is downtown parking garage rate increases. I've got a brief presentation for you this evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about our parking ordinance and our current parking zones, and then talk about COVID-19, our favorite topic that just won't go away, and our Rebound Program and how those are affecting parking demand. Talk a little bit about our fiscal year 21 adopted budget for the parking fund, and then discuss the proposed parking zones and rate increase in the garage. As mentioned, the recommended action before you this evening is to approve an hourly rate increase in the city's parking garages to $1.25 an hour and increase the lost ticket rate to $25. So by way of background, you all are familiar with the parking ordinance, at least in some way. really, it is the backbone of our parking program and our parking management program. So the primary goal is to create a positive parking experience for folks, where when you're driving, if you choose to drive downtown, you can find a parking spot. There's 1 or 2 on each block without having to circle around and become traffic and become congestion. It also encourages folks to park once and walk. We have a very walkable downtown, and by design, and we want people to park in our garages or our purple poles, or and then walk to their destination or multiple destinations. So the parking ordinance really outlines why we charge for parking, and we charge for parking to control parking and really to achieve an 85% occupancy rate. So Matt mentioned this magic number of 85% occupancy. What that really means is what the goal is. We are managing so folks can find the cheapest parking in the quickest, most convenient area that they want to park. The parking ordinance also outlines how parking revenue is used. We do have a parking enterprise fund. It is separate from the general fund. So all parking revenue that is collected goes into a separate pot. And within that pot, that revenue can only be used to support parking operations and to be reinvested into downtown for downtown enhancements like public safety, our free downtown trolley, landscaping, downtown events, etc. So for our parking zones, we have 3. You all are fairly familiar with these, but I will go over them. So our downtown core is really our heaviest used area. We call these our green meters. They are newly called green meters just because we have purple meters. We need another color. So our downtown core, this area is, as you can see on the map, this orange area. It's $2 an hour within 3-hour time limits, and there's about 500 spaces in this area. This is our heaviest used area. It is closest to all of the restaurants, businesses, and our highest demand area. The next zone, if you will, is our parking garages, of which we have 3 that are located within the area of the downtown core. So we have 3 garages. They operate 24/7. And the rate in the garages ranges from 50 cents to $1 an hour. And within these 3 garages, we have about 1,500 spaces. And these garages really we see short-term and long-term parkers here, depending on how full the downtown core street meters are. We see fairly high occupancy in our garages as well. And then our third zone is really our purple pole zone, which the Transportation Commission created a few years ago. So the purple pole zone is $1 an hour, and there are no time limits in this area. And it is by far the biggest area for on-street parking, for long-term on-street parking. There are about 1,000 spaces within the purple poles. And this area is a little bit lower demand. These spaces are a little bit further out for folks to either park once and walk, or park all day if they're an employee, or simply just want to pay a cheaper rate and they're okay with walking. So those are our 3 parking zones. And I will reference these back later in the presentation. So COVID-19, the thing that we are all dealing with right now, it has impacted just about everything that we have done, and parking is no exception. So as we're all familiar, March 16th, shelter-in-place order went into place by the county, which essentially closed down most of our businesses downtown, or forced them to operate in some kind of very limited capacity. As a result, parking demand decreased significantly. The photo on the far right is March 20th at 6 p.m. Green is basically less than 50% occupancy, and I can tell you we were at about 20% occupancy at the highest, at the peak in March. As a result of that, on actually March 18th, we turned off our meters and made our garages, closed our garages, and ceased parking enforcement because we have a demand-based program. If there is no demand, we are not charging, we're not enforcing, etc. So this is probably the first time we've seen this, first time we've actually wanted to have a parking problem downtown. So since then, things have changed a little bit. And as county orders have been lifted and allowed more activities to open up, we've seen parking demand kind of rebound, if you will. And on May 19th, as things were changing on the county order side, the city council approved the Rebound Program, which basically will facilitate socially distanced activities downtown. We wanted folks to be able to come downtown and enjoy their downtown, but in the most safest way possible. So the program really allows for flexibility for curbside pickup, outdoor dining, retail pop-ups, temporary street and block closures. So we're seeing a lot of activity in our downtown currently, and a lot of social distancing and all of that. But we're also seeing increased parking demand as people want to be out of their homes and enjoying regular life as much as they can. With this activity, we have seen, as I mentioned, parking demand increase. And as a result, on July 1st, we turned our meters back on in the downtown core area and started parking enforcement again. And for two reasons. One, 85% occupancy, we were hitting that occupancy, and we were getting requests from businesses and folks to start controlling parking. Folks were looking for a parking spot downtown and couldn't find one. So because this area was increasing demand and above 85%, we started charging in that area. So on July 7th, council adopted the parking fund budget. And as they were coming up with revenue assumptions for the entire year, we were thinking about how to phase in parking to really help businesses have parking for their customers and their employees in a way that met demand needs. So, but knowing that COVID is a very, COVID-19 and what we're going through is very uncertain. We don't know what is happening. As we see just this week, some orders had changed from the state and within our county. So council really wanted to take a phased in approach just because of all the uncertainty that is happening around parking. And so their phased in approach really looks at slowly phasing back in charging for parking, because that's how we think demand will be coming back as well. So as I mentioned, phase one, we are currently in. We started charging in the downtown core area. Phase two would begin on September 1st with turning our garage charging back on. And then phase three would turn our purple poles back on. And these dates are flexible. It's really going to be based on demand. But for budget purposes and revenue assumption purposes, this was kind of the dates that that were approved. So where are we as far as parking garage demand currently? These graphs are a little crazy to look at. I apologize. But really, as we started charging in the downtown core area, we saw our demand increase in our garages. And so we're above half capacity in all three garages on a daily basis, which is almost equal to what we were at before COVID-19 started. So we are starting to see that demand increase in this zone. And so we are monitoring this closely. So to the meat of this presentation, the proposed rate changes. So as I mentioned in the budget assumptions, we're taking a phased-in approach, and you might have noticed in phase two, there is an increase in the garage rate. And the reason for that really is to align our demand-based model so we are balanced between our three zones. So as I mentioned, our downtown core area is our highest demand and highest priced area for parking downtown. So if folks feel like they want a space right up front to where they're going, they pay a higher amount, and that's the downtown core zone. And then our garages are really our most inexpensive zone, but they're also like a medium demand. So we see a higher demand in our garages, yet they are the lowest priced zone. And then our purple poles are our lowest demand area, but they're priced higher than the parking garages. And so the recommended action really is to align our prices. So the downtown core is the most expensive. The parking garages are kind of this medium zone that are a lot cheaper than the downtown core area, but more expensive than the lowest demand, least convenient parking in our purple poles. So looking ahead, we are monitoring COVID-19 and the pandemic very closely. We are still seeing high parking demand downtown, even with some of our activities not being able to open in the county. And we are monitoring economic trends as well. But as we look ahead to the full year and where we think parking will be in the next few months, we believe we need to right size our parking zones and create more of a tiered, balanced structure that should be in place based on our demand model. And so the recommended action for you this evening, again, is to approve the hourly rate increase in the parking garages to $1.25 an hour in all 3 garages, and then increase the lost ticket rate. With that, I will answer any questions.
Okay, first, do we have any public comment?
Chair German, actually, this would be an opportunity for the commissioners to ask questions of staff. Just would ask to withhold comment until having received any public comments.
Great. I got some questions.
Go ahead.
All right, thanks. Some of these are just for my information. How many lost tickets are there? Like, is that a big number? Is it a little number? I'm just kind of curious.
Great question. It's not a high number. Actually, we've seen, we saw more lost tickets when we had tokens in our garages, just because people would lose the little, I don't know if you were familiar with our little very cute tokens that we had in our garage. We saw more lost tokens than we do tickets. I think people are just more used to holding onto a ticket or putting it in your purse or somewhere where you can find it. What we have seen is an increase in folks parking for a long duration, like days and days. So folks parking for a couple days and then saying they lost their ticket and then paying a cheaper rate than it would have been for 3 days of parking. So we have seen that. It's not in high numbers, but folks, as we all know, when they see a deal, they're going to take it. So especially around parking. So yeah, to answer your question, it's not a high number.
Okay. How many parking spots have been taken up by the Rebound program with the restaurants or the curbside? And how much of an impact is that really having?
So we have assumed through the couple phases that the Rebound program is going to go through in the next couple months that we'll use up to about 125 spaces for outdoor dining, curbside pickup, etc. I believe the last time I looked, we are about at 40 spaces. So 125 is just the max that we want to get to. So I think we're at 40, but actually Matt can probably answer that question knowing that he's knee deep in the data.
That sounds about right. 40.
All right.
Okay, thanks. And last question. If we talk about this phased approach with the surges in COVID, I'm trying to word this correctly. Is the date of September 1st, is it an arbitrary date, or does that need to be pushed back if the spike continues to happen and there's more shelter in place orders, or what happens if another shelter in place order? I know it's kind of a broad question, but I'd just love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, certainly. Really what we were looking at, these dates are not set in stone. It was really just we were looking at a 4-month period where we wanted to phase in, and really this 4-month period is a time for us to really monitor our parking demand, along with the economic activity that's happening in downtown and the county orders. So where if we hadn't seen a surge in cases and the county hadn't said, hold off on opening indoor dining and things like that, we would have likely seen parking demand increase in our garages and other areas just because more things are open, there's more activity coming downtown. So that September date may have been August. But as we're looking at current county health orders and kind of gauging what's gonna happen, I think September is a decent estimate. We could push it back if we see another shelter in place go into effect where outdoor dining is no longer allowed or something like that. There is flexibility there. We don't see that happening now. I think that, it's still a couple months away. And as we know, in this COVID period, anything can happen in the next couple of months. So we're hoping, I think as we all are, that that cases kind of stabilize and go back down to where they were in June.
Thanks.
Sam, you have a question?
I have a couple questions. So the lost revenue during this crisis, I guess I'm curious what that could potentially mean for investments in the near future. And then the temporary spots that are considered, I guess, curbside pickup or loading zone right now. I mean, given, I think, comfort levels of various people in our community of actually parking and walking and spending time downtown versus wanting to just zoom in and still support a restaurant and pick something up, I'm curious if those are special spots and how long those will remain.
Excellent question. So I'll address the lost revenue. So within the budget assumptions that, the budget rather, that council approved, it does account for lost revenue over the full fiscal year. So as we're charging in one area, our purple poles are free, our garages are free for 2 to 3 months into the fiscal year. So council did adopt a balanced budget for the parking fund. So it accounted for lost revenue for free parking and the spaces that are used for the Rebound Program. And we were able to balance the budget going forward. So lost revenue, we accounted for that in the budget. And then the, I'm sorry, remind me of your second question.
The curbside pickup spots that have.
Right. So the Rebound Program is meant to be temporary and go through, I believe, October 15th. So those spaces, curbside pickup spaces, those 15-minute spaces would be going through October. But Smadar, I know you're kind of more into all of that. So any comments on that?
Yeah, and what we had to do was we actually amended the Muni code temporarily to allow for that type of loading to occur. If that's something that we think moving forward makes sense, especially with having the parking sensor data to kind of see how people are using parking spaces, that's always something that we could go in and just add to our Muni code more permanently.
And just for the record, that was Spadar Boardman, our city traffic engineer.
Thanks, Andy.
Danny, you're chomping at the bit? No?
Yes, I have a couple quick questions. Was there any discussion given to raising the street parking rates, given that there will be less supply for the foreseeable future? And now we've added a disincentive to park in the garages, in that it used to be 4 times as expensive, and now it's just less than half expensive compared to garage to the street. So question, first part of that is, was that discussed? And if so, why wasn't that decided to move forward on that? And secondly, as a commission, are we allowed to propose that as an amendment to what we're talking about right now?
So to answer your question on, was street parking considered, a rate increase for the street parking considered? No, it wasn't. As we were looking at our the parking zones, we really wanted to get back to where we were. But as we were looking at historical data and looking across our, our 3 areas, we knew that the garages were the most out of whack. That's the most professional term I can think of at the moment. Most out of balance, rather, between our 2 street parking zones. So we really wanted to fix that and see what happens to demand. Because really our garages were filling up on a regular basis with longer term parkers, and we have long-term parking at the purple poles. So really we want to make sure that we're utilizing all of our spaces downtown equally. So by raising the parking garage rate, making it cheaper or more expensive than the purple poles, we're hoping more people choose the purple poles and kind of balance out demand in the garage and then increase demand in the purple poles. And then your second question was, can the commission amend or suggest another type of rate increase? That is up to the commission. You can do that. You have power over, you have authority over parking rates. So if you'd like to, that is up to the commission.
Okay, great, thank you. And I just have one other quick question.
Can I jump in and provide one quick point of clarification on that in terms of where the Transportation Commission's authority is for setting rates in the downtown parking meter zone? Specifically, there has to be an occupancy survey prepared and presented to the commission with average occupancy rates in order for the commission to then take action based on that 85th percentile benchmark. It's in section 3-5.1408B, I think it is, of the Walnut Creek Municipal Code. So I just want to caution that that extra step has to happen. And as well, this item is only, the agenda is only specifically for the parking garage rates and not the parking meter rates. We would actually have to put on a future agenda that item and notice it as such in order to adjust the parking meter rates downtown.
Thank you for that clarification, Andy. So you could ask staff to look at that, consider it, look at our data. Certainly if the majority of the commission wanted to do that, you could do that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that further clarification.
Thank you, both of you. My second question is simply, is there still free Wednesday parkings in the garage?
That is a good question. Yes, there is.
And is that being discussed as it was? I mean, I remember when we voted on it to originally take place, it was a temporary thing supposed to be for the holiday season, and it became permanent without ever coming back to us. Is that being discussed as removing that then as part of this to realign?
We have not discussed it yet, but certainly as as the garages come back online, we'd want to monitor demand and see, our Wednesdays high demand times in this new COVID scenario. And if it is in high demand, we probably don't need to have the incentive of free parking on those Wednesday evenings. So it would certainly be something that we could look at and bring back to the commission to take action on.
Okay, thank you so much. I have no further questions.
Okay, I have a couple, but I defer to Jamie. You did first.
Yeah. I was wondering if we've compared the proposed pricing to the private garages that are in the downtown core and taken a look at how the different garages impact others in terms of demand based off of where they're located and how much they might be charging, and if we've done any modeling to understand whether that would potentially have any adverse impacts to revenue if we raise the rate to too high of the rate and thereby reduce demand and lower revenue.
So we have looked at other garages in Walnut Creek in the area. I think the biggest area where we do have competition, if you will, for parkers in the garages are garages that have free parking. So I believe Plaza Escuela downtown has free parking. That is kind of the area people want to park. Also, different garages have different pricing models. So we charge by the hour in our garages. The first hour is free. Where Broadway Plaza has more of a graduated rate where the first 3 hours are free and then the rate increases based on the length that you stay. I believe Growers Square has they charge by the half hour. So some of it is not as comparable as, apples to apples on an hourly rate. Are we equal or lower? And really, because of the location of our garages being in the kind of the core of downtown, we've really focused on what are our rates? How do we balance our rates between our on-street rates? So we have not done that comparison and set our rates based on private garages. We've really set them based on our 3 zones and really tiering those.
Okay, and I was just wondering when we last had a parking rate increase.
That is a great question. I might have to look at Andy, who's been with the city longer than I have, because it has not happened in 5 years since I have been here.
Okay.
I can tell you that when I first moved out here about 23 and a half years ago, it was $0.25 an hour. And I remember handing a quarter to a person in a booth and thinking, why are they even bothering? And at some point it went to 50 cents an hour, but I don't know when that occurred. It's been cheap for a very long time. That's all I can really recall.
So it sounds like it wasn't, that whenever that rate increase went into effect, it seems like it went without incident. So I guess I'm also just wondering if there would be some sort of what the communication plan would look like if we would enact a rate increase.
Sure, yeah. So because we kind of have a timeline, if you will, as we're monitoring demand and looking ahead to maybe enacting this in the fall, we've got a lot of time to start getting the word out. Just like we did with turning our meters back on just in the last month, we really took a full month to let people know that we were going to start charging again and enforcing again. So lots of different mediums that we've used. Of course, our city's website, most basic, our multiple social media channels that the city operates along with our police department. But also we've relied on our partners with Walnut Creek Downtown, our downtown association, and the chamber to help spread that word to businesses and their employees that, we're making changes to parking. And then lastly, what I thought was a great idea, and it wasn't mine, I take no credit for it. It was our parking enforcement team was little flyers that look like parking tickets, but they said, this is not a parking ticket, warning people like, hey, we're going to start charging and we're going to start enforcing was put on people's cars. Whether they enjoyed it, not quite sure, but it sure did get the word out.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, I have a couple. First of all, you sort of answered the question about the private garages. That is they, in terms of they don't charge the same as the city garages. Generally people don't understand that. So has there been any discussion about drawing the private garages in the same pricing structure the city uses?
I would love to fix pricing across all areas. I don't have that power though. We do have a great partnership with our private parking operators, namely our lots and other garages downtown. They do try to keep with our pricing, and this is more for on-street, less garages, but they try to stay in line with our pricing just because it's, if we have a more competitive price, people are going to choose our parking areas than theirs. But yeah, we have not come together and said this will be the price rate, because really our goal is really 85%. We want to make sure people have a positive parking experience. I think private operators although they want their parking to turn over as well, they're also in it to create a profit. They're in a parking business. So I'm not quite sure if they would want to charge such a low rate that we charge.
Okay. Say how to phrase this question. Given that it appears that we're heading toward another shutdown, maybe, hopefully not, but have you surveyed the businesses, how they feel about a rate increase in the garages?
Yeah, we had a lot of conversation with Walnut Creek Downtown and our chamber as we were kind of bringing the Rebound Program online and working through details. We were having these conversations about more of a phased-in approach to parking, and they were supportive of that. As I mentioned, they were like, "Can you please start charging and controlling parking because people are just staying all day, and my customers don't have a place to park." And we did float the idea with them around increasing the garage rate, and we did not hear any negative feedback on that.
Okay. Excuse this question, not too many years in government finance. The parking is an enterprise fund. So this year in the budget, was anything that was in the general fund put in the parking fund?
No.
Okay. 150% is a lot. Okay.
I have another question, Mr. Chair, if I can.
Yes, go ahead.
If we wanted to approve the parking rate increase, but create a flexible vehicle for the staff based on COVID-19 and like phase 2 not coming back by September 1st, or additional shelter in places, is there a way we could do it to create some sort of flexibility or other benchmarks versus just doing it on this date? Because I just see more waves coming, and I want to be sensitive to the downtown businesses, so I'm trying to create some flexibility for you.
No, certainly. So really I should say that the September date is really just a point in time. I think what we're going to be looking at is demand. And I think as we're monitoring it now, we see demand kind of heading in that direction where we need to start charging again in the garages. However, that could change. And if by, we're getting close to September and we're not seeing that demand, we would hold off on charging. So it's really going to be based on demand rather than a specific date. So, that's the intention behind the phased-in approach, is to really be cautious about how we're turning parking back on, because we are being sensitive to businesses. And the last thing that we want to do is discourage people from coming downtown. But I think as we look at demand, I think we're going to be looking at demand with the county orders as well, just because, it's still uncertain what's going to be happening in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, the intention is not to, come September 1, we're completely going to start charging again. But if we are seeing demand increase over the next few months, we would start messaging out that we are charging again in the garages. And then, when demand warranted it, we would turn charging back on.
So, Mr. Secretary, I'd like to make a motion to amend the price increase proposal.
Just a second, we actually still have to take public communication.
Okay.
So if you'd like, I can ask if is there any member of the public who wishes to provide public comments at this time. Please use the raise hand feature or press *9 if you're connected by phone only, if you would like to provide a public comment. And then this time, do we have anybody really requesting? I don't have any letters. And it looks like we actually have no, I spoke too soon. It looks like we have nobody here who wishes to provide comments. So then it would return back to the commission for commissioner comments, if any.
I'd like to propose that we modify the request to raise rates to tie the request, along what Jared was asking, to the governor's schedule for reopening businesses. That if things are getting shut down, we don't raise the rates. But by, say, October, November, if things start opening again, then we can raise them. The idea being that if things are shut down, there's not going to be any parking available.
Mr. Chair, if I may suggest, trying to think of a way where we can make thinking towards implementation. The emergency order issued by the city council grants certain powers to the city manager to, among other things, lower parking rates in response to COVID issues. And that power rests with the city manager until the emergency declaration has been revoked, which would presumably occur at some point when vaccine is making its rounds and the like. For your consideration, perhaps if you're interested in approving the parking rate as kind of a cap, but then directing the city manager to not implement that full rate until business conditions warrant it or demand conditions warrant it, that would be I don't know if and I'm looking to Carla, sorry, to see if, I'm trying to think towards something that's implementable. Am I making things worse, Carla?
So to clarify, Chair, would it be because the action before you this evening is the rate increase. And so it's not, but it sounds like your amendment is more on timing rather than the rate increase. So it would be so you could approve the rate increase and then direct staff to implement that based on demand, or it sounds like more of the county order timelines. Is that okay?
It seems unseemly to implement a rate increase when more and more businesses are being shut down.
I agree with David, and I'm trying to go the same route where I'd be willing to approve a rate increase if there's some sort of flexibility created given the changing world. And I see where Andy's going to give that permission. Increase it, but specifically give permission to the city manager to adjust it down if needed and conveying our wishes.
Yeah, I mean, just this past week, what outdoor dining or indoor dining and hair salons were closed again. So,
well, hair salons were closed. Indoor dining hadn't started in our county yet.
okay.
But yeah, hair salons. Mm-hmm.
So theoretically, there's less need for parking.
So we're still seeing, again, this is all going to be, the intention is that this is based on demand. So as we're seeing demand increase, we would want to control demand so that folks can find a parking spot. That is our whole demand-based program. So I think what I'm hearing is that you'd like staff to be very sensitive on how we approach, charging back on in this like area in our garage zone, to really look at county orders, how things are coming back online, and not doing it while things are still closed. Am I conveying that?
You agree with that, Jared? Yes.
Yeah, we just got to figure out how to say that to actually be able to vote on that. I'm trying to type it up on the side. I do have one other question. How does this, at the Lesher Center, there's oftentimes where that garage there is like a $5 flat rate when there's performances. How does this impact that?
So it does not. That's a separate flat rate. only when there's events either in the afternoon or in the evening. We are not in a, I don't think we're going to see leisure events until January. That's kind of what we're assuming, given the social distancing and gathering restrictions. So those would not be, we would not be charging a flat rate for events if there are no events in that garage.
Yes. Yes.
Quite frankly, I was surprised to see the demand so high right now, considering, some businesses closed and the limitations on no indoor dining and just some outdoor dining. And I'm curious if maybe that demand is driven by people not being able to take transit and, well, choosing not to take transit, I should say, given the circumstances, and taking their cars instead. But I'm pleasantly surprised, I guess, with our demand so high at the current moment.
If we were to vote for the rate increase, when would it go into effect?
It would be based on demand. So, it could be that by mid-August, if things are turning around and more things are open, we're going to see an increase in demand. We would go into we would turn on charging. I guess I'm talking about two different things at the same time. So we would turn on charging in the garages with this new rate implemented.
Can we set an arbitrary date in the future that you can turn on charging?
Well, we have an arbitrary date already, which is September 1st.
So the date that the commission has, well, not the date, what the commission has under its jurisdiction is the rate. And you certainly could say we approve the rate effective a certain date. But the commission does not have jurisdiction over whether or not to turn on the charging at all, just for clarification.
Yes. Sam. Jamie?
I was just going to say that I think that the analysis and the proposal make a lot of sense to me. And I think staff has shown a good understanding of the need to take away charging for parking when needed, as an example of when shelter in place went into effect and the meters were turned off. And so I have less reservation of moving forward with a rate increase because I have a lot of trust that city staff will know when to appropriately implement it based off of demand and data and be able to, and given the emergency order, it sounds like there is a mechanism in place to turn things off again if needed. So I have less concerns about that. I mean, I think the general concern of not wanting to deter people to visit our downtown area because of parking rates makes a lot of sense, but I don't know that I have major concerns, and it seems like there's a way to mitigate that quite easily if needed.
I have a possible suggestion here that it could be included in a motion if the commission so chose, that approving the rate, but that the rate would become effective or start charging. Well, no, the decision's only on the rate, but that the rate could be effective when demand warrants based on state and county health orders. So leaving the ultimate timing to the discretion of staff or the city manager, but based on certain factors, but approving that rate for when it does, when the rate, when the parking is charged for again.
To me, that sounds fine. The problem is that it really is to bring alignment to the parking rates from the purple holes to the garages to the core. And the timing is bad for that, to have a huge increase. So unfortunate that it's bad, but I like the wording that you've come up with, because I trust the staff to not charge, in excess of what needs to be done. You want to run it by us one more time for a formal motion?
So if you would like to consider as a motion to approve the increase in the parking rate to $1.25 an hour, increase the lost ticket charge to $25, but that the increased rate become effective when demand warrants based on state and county health orders.
Okay, to protect my failing voice, I'll make that motion, and will anybody second it?
Well, I have a quick question. Can I ask a question in there
Yeah.
once he motioned it?
Yeah.
Does that give Carla, does that give the flexibility that we were talking about? Do you feel comfortable that that does what you need to as staff?
Yeah, certainly. So the way I would interpret that, if that is the motion and approved, is if we are in a situation where we're kind of backsliding, if you will, on county health orders, so things are starting to close, and my assumption is that parking demand would also be going down at the same time. We would not implement the new rate in the garage. We would wait. Is that in the spirit of that motion, I guess?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, second.
Okay, we have
All in favor?
a motion and a second. Let me take a roll call vote here. Let's see, Commissioner Cagle,
Aye.
Commissioner Ash,
Aye.
there you go. Commissioner Salcido,
Aye.
Vice Chair Milks,
Aye.
and Chair German.
Aye.
Passes 5-0.
Can I take a moment and thank staff for your creativity during this crisis with utilizing our parking spots in different ways and helping accommodate businesses and residents during this time. It's really appreciated and inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing to see. It's amazing the opportunities you can take in a horrible crisis that we're in that are positive and make, offer the community some relief during this dark time. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may suggest, we are about an hour and 20 minutes into this meeting, and the next item I expect to be a long one. If the commission wishes to take a 5-minute break, now would be a good time to consider that.
All in favor of taking a break?
Aye.
Okay, I will set the timer for 5 minutes.
Okay.
And, oops, no, hang on. There we go.
Is it on?
Chair German, your microphone's muted. There you go.
Welcome back to the Transportation Commission meeting. We're now down to item 5D, an update on SB 743 BMT implementation errors. Staff and its consultant team will present the latest information on SB 743 implementation for the city, including background, state requirements, significant thresholds, screening criteria, methodology, and next steps. Staff report.
Thanks, Commissioner German. Smadar Boardman, City Traffic Engineer here, and with me today is Ian Barnes from Fair and Piers Traffic Consulting.
Great, thank you, Smadar. Just allow me 1 second here just to get screen sharing all set up. Sorts of fun technology happening these days. I think I am sharing my screen now. Well, thank you again, Smadar, for that introduction. Good evening, Transportation Commission members, city staff, and members of the public who have joined us tonight. Again, my name is Ian Barnes. I'm with Fair and Piers in the Walnut Creek office. I'm also joined this evening by my colleague Ashley Takushi, who has been assisting in the implementation efforts for Senate Bill 743 and the switch from level of service analysis for CEQA purposes to a new metric called vehicle miles traveled. So we presented some initial information on this, I believe, back in early 2019, if my memory serves me right. So maybe it would be helpful just to have a quick little refresher. So CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, which governs a lot of what we do for traffic studies, requires that we analyze the project's environmental effects, including those on the transportation system. Now, there are several aspects of the CEQA guidelines which carry the force of law, such as needing to do a good faith effort and not using scientifically outdated information, and that our analysis should improve as more and better data becomes available. So Senate Bill 743, which was passed in 2013 and signed into law by Governor Brown, took about 6 years to finally implement. And that is because it is a fundamental change to the way CEQA is done for transportation impact analysis. The key changes in Senate Bill 743 that as of July 1st of this year have come into force statewide include the use of vehicle miles of travel in CEQA analysis. This metric replaces level of service, which is a congestion-based metric. It's a letter grade A through F that measures the quality of operations on the roadway system. Vehicle miles of travel, on the other hand, measures the total amount of driving generated by, say, a project or a city, or the total amount of driving in an area. Now, it's important to note that we can still use level of service to define physical improvements and to make sure that they're going to work. That just cannot live in traffic studies for CEQA purposes anymore. We'll talk a little bit more about what SB 743 doesn't do and how that might relate to city policies going forward. However, the main message for Senate Bill 743 is that it shifts the focus of CEQA analysis from looking at the impacts to drivers to now looking at the environmental impacts from driving. Another key piece of the SB 743 story is to look at the legislative intent when the law was passed back in 2013. And the law itself was passed in response to the state not meeting a lot of its climate targets, AB 32, for example. And so SB 743's legislative intent is largely designed to encourage infill development, improving public health through the promotion of active transportation, walking, biking, and taking transit, and then also reducing greenhouse gas emissions consistent with other state laws, goals, and policies. So while SB 743 does fundamentally change the way we do traffic analysis for CEQA documents in terms of project entitlements and review, it does not change several items that affect transportation policy for agencies throughout the state, including not changing around the general plan. You can still use a level of service policy in your general plan, and require that projects undergo traffic studies to assess the consistency of the project with general plan goals and policies. It doesn't change around traffic impact fee programs. Currently, the city has a traffic impact fee program in place to fund needed circulation system improvements. It also doesn't change the state constitution, the Subdivision Map Act, or several other related state laws. And effectively what they're saying there is that while it does change around CEQA purposes, it does not change the right of the city as a lead agency to make sure that projects are reviewed compared to general plan goals and policies. So with that background in mind, knowing that it's taken a while to get to this step in terms of the implementation process, I wanted to walk through a few parts of the implementation process to date. And there's been two parallel tracks. The first track on the left is the efforts that the city has contracted Fair and Peers for to assist in the implementation of SB 743 for the city. We've done a number of informational presentations to city commissions and to the city council as to what the changes mean for the city going forward. We've reviewed how SB 743 will affect the city traffic study process in terms of potential retention of level of service analysis, but also including a VMT analysis. Reviewing screening and other local implementation options, which is a way to say, which we'll touch on a little bit more in the presentation tonight, that there are some exceptions to the need to run a VMT analysis for projects going forward. And then finally, to prepare the city for implementation, which is now the step that we're in. These city-led efforts were also being led in parallel to efforts that CCTA was undertaking, which Fair and Peers was involved in, as well as Placeworks, who I believe are presenting after us tonight on another agenda item. These more regional implementation efforts were to explore the different metrics that could be used for VMT analysis, basically what VMT counts in the analysis, the methods, which are how we calculate VMT, the thresholds of significance, which allow us to measure whether an impact is significant or not in CEQA. Again, screening, which is providing exemptions from projects for needing to do VMT analysis. And finally, thinking about regional mitigation efforts. If a project does have a significant impact with respect to VMT, how do you mitigate or alleviate the impact? Finally, CCTA has put out through its member agencies information for member agency adoptions. And both tracks have now met in the middle here in summer of 2020 as we explore the city adoption process, of which this is one of the steps. So in terms of metrics and methods, CCTA has provided guidance to use the following metrics. For residential projects, looking at home-based VMT per resident. In this case, we'd be looking at the VMT generated by all trips that have a start or an end at a person's residence. And then because SB 743 does not require, but encourages the use of an efficiency metric or a metric per capita, we would divide by the number of residents for the project. As such, we'd be able to tell whether or not a certain residential project performs better than or worse than a certain performance standard. For employment type uses like industrial or office buildings, we don't look at all of the VMT to and from that place of employment. SB 743 is really focused on looking at the reduction of commute trips for employment uses. So we'd only look at the parts of the VMT generated by this site that is home work trip based, or kind of your commute trip based, and then we divide by the number of employees on site. For more regional serving uses, like retail establishments, for example, we would look at the metric of total VMT per service population. We would look at all VMT generated by that project, and then divide by the number of service population is usually defined as employees plus residents, so or visitors. So that one there is a little bit more of an open-ended metric for retail and other regional serving type uses. In terms of the calculation methods, the State Office of Planning and Research, which produced guidance that CCTA's implementation effort took into account, strongly recommends the use of a travel demand model to forecast VMT. The main reason for using a travel demand model is because it looks at the complex interactions between land uses and then looks at congestion patterns and travel times to understand where people want to go and how people are going to get from point A to point B, which is a key part of calculating VMT. So up on the screen there, for use for the city of Walnut Creek, you would use the CCTA countywide travel demand model. I believe up here is a picture of kind of the Treat Boulevard corridor at I-680. The model, of course, does cover the entire county, but also areas outside the county as well. So you really do get a more full accounting of the VMT generated by a particular project. In terms of thresholds, a significant CEQA impact occurs based on these following thresholds, which differ a little bit depending on what sort of project type you're looking at. So for residential projects, a significant impact occurs when you have baseline project generated home-based VMT per resident that is higher than 85% of the existing countywide average. So what does that mean? We're looking at that home-based VMT per resident metric, and we're going to compare that based on a countywide average. The 85% number represents the fact that the State Office of Planning and Research is suggesting that in order to meet the state's greenhouse gas reduction targets, new development throughout the state would need to achieve 15% below a baseline value. So 15%, 100 minus 15% gives you 85%. So it is important to note that for the city of Walnut Creek, this is the least stringent threshold per CCTA's guidance. The city does have the right to impose a more stringent threshold. For employment generated uses, again, we're looking at baseline generated homework VMT per worker. And then, but here we're looking at 85% of the Bay Area wide average. And that is reflective of the fact that OPR's recommendations for employment uses does in fact look at Bay Area travel as a whole for the employment category. And then for regional serving projects, again, we're using that same 85% number, but again, using project generated total VMT per service population greater than 85% of the existing countywide average. So for retail projects, we're looking at other retail establishments throughout the county, for example. Now, the other key part that I haven't touched on that is baseline and existing countywide averages. OPR is recommending only looking at a near-term horizon year, so kind of an before the project and then plus project in terms of this kind of existing condition. If a project does have a significant and unavoidable impact under the under this kind of near-term analysis, then you would need to do a future year analysis looking into the cumulative year, which I believe in Contra Costa County is the year 2040. And that's recognizing that that VMT impacts in general are somewhat more cumulative and may be different depending on how cities build out versus their general plans. So moving on to screening. So as I noted, screening is a way to allow projects that fit into certain types and fit into that legislative intent of SB 743 to bypass the need for a VMT calculation for their traffic study. The 6 main categories identified by CCTA, which largely tier off state guidance, is for projects that are in transit priority areas, which are, I'll talk about those here in a little bit, but basically projects near high capacity and high frequency transit. Projects in low VMT areas. So if you have areas of the city that are already low VMT generating versus your standard of significance, you can just go ahead and screen that out. Affordable housing projects and projects that are very small can be screened out because they generally have a low VMT or don't result in a significant change in VMT going forward. Locally serving public facilities, parks and rec, schools potentially could be screened out because they tend to redistribute existing trips rather than generate new trips on their own. And finally, neighborhood serving retail. Research indicates that these sorts of projects that are smaller in size can lead to situations where instead of having to drive cross town to get your to get a gallon of milk, you can just go to your neighborhood market instead, and maybe you walk or bike, or you just drive a lesser amount. So in terms of those first 2 screening criteria, I did want to kind of expand upon those a little bit more since they're really critical for the city, we think. The first is a transit priority areas. Now those are defined as two main definitions. The first is a half-mile walk shed, basically a half-mile walking distance around either the Walnut Creek BART station or the Contra Costa Center Pleasant Hill BART station. That watershed does expand into the city of Walnut Creek. The other definition is for a quarter-mile watershed around high-quality transit corridors. That's a corridor that has peak period service of frequency 15 minutes or less. And for the city of Walnut Creek, one example of that is the area around the Route 4 downtown trolley line. Now, this exception per CCTA's recommendation would only apply to office uses of less than 200,000 square feet and retail uses of less than 50,000 square feet. There's no size exemption mentioned for residential projects. So a residential project of any size could qualify for this screening criteria. In terms of low VMT areas, what we're really looking at here is projects that are in low VMT areas that have similar form and function to other uses in those low VMT areas. For this one, the cap is about 210 housing units or less than 200,000 square feet of office or industrial uses. So for example, if you had a residential project in an area where the home-based VMT per resident is already 15% below the countywide average, then you can say, yeah, that project's screened out. It's going to take on the same characteristics of its neighboring projects, and thus we don't have to do a VMT analysis. We have the evidence to show that it's a less than significant impact. Now, those screening criteria are recommendations by CCTA. They kind of represent a high level set. The city may consider modifications to the screening criteria to make them, in all probability, more stringent. Some agencies throughout Contra Costa County and throughout the Bay Area have prohibited drive-throughs from taking advantage of screening opportunities just because drive-throughs generate more VMT. Or they maybe put a cap on local serving retail project size. While CCTA has not recommended a cap, and they are encouraging cities to consider those on an agency by agency basis, we're seeing caps put on from 20,000 to 30,000 up to 50,000. The state guidance is 50,000 square feet. It's also important to note that while screening removes VMT from the need to do a VMT analysis for the transportation section, VMT calculations may still be needed to satisfy the requirements of analysis for other sections like the air quality or greenhouse gas sections in an environmental document. So let's say if the city is analyzing a project and it doesn't screen out, a VMT analysis is done and a significant impact is found versus the thresholds of significance. Then what do you do? So there are a few strategies here for mitigation, and this part of SB 743 implementation on the mitigation front continues to evolve. Whereas under level of service, we would look at perhaps adding lanes or changing signal timings. Under VMT, the focus of mitigation measures is either to reduce the number of vehicle trips being generated, promoting walking and biking, or reducing the lengths of trips that are being generated. Now, the city is actually a bit in the lead on this because you guys do have a strategic transportation plan, Rethinking Mobility, that highlights a number of strategies that could be used as mitigation measures for a VMT impact. Other strategies include changing the size or characteristics of projects, encouraging mixed use, for example, improving access to transit or reducing the cost barrier to using transit in terms of subsidized transit passes, for example, encouraging walking and biking, and then unbundling parking, which is a fancier way of saying, decoupling parking pricing from residential units, for example. In terms of reducing the length of vehicle trips, that's increasing access to common goods and services. The classic example of this is including some retail in an area that is underserved by retail. And then locate a project close to nearby population. If you did have a project that had demand or that was going to satisfy demand for goods and services and you put it in a very far-flung area of the city, well, that project, by virtue of its location, would encourage a lot of driving and encourage a higher VMT number because it's just further away from a population center. The critical step for CEQA analysis for mitigation is being able to demonstrate the effectiveness of the mitigation measures to the standard required by CEQA. For under level of service, we know pretty well that when you add a lane or you add a turn pocket, you're going to make congestion better, and thus you're going to mitigate your impact. For transportation demand management strategies that reduce VMT, when they're applied on a project by project basis, the amount of evidence that we have on hand to support the demonstration of effectiveness to the need required by CEQA is unfortunately a little bit low. There is one document up there, the CAPCOA Quantifying Greenhouse Gas Reduction Measures document that we're actually updating right now through our work with the California Air Resources Board. But that body of research there is somewhat limited. The other strategies that are perhaps, I want to say unique to Contra Costa County, but CCTA is being very forward thinking in terms of looking at regional VMT mitigation strategies, is that CCTA is trying to develop in the future a VMT impact fee program whereby projects could pay in lieu impact fees towards VMT reducing measures, and also looking at a mitigation exchange or banking program. Are there areas of the county that do have lower VMT that projects in a higher VMT area of the county could contribute to? Again, these two areas very much in flux, especially the mitigation exchange and banking program. That effort is just getting started, I believe. I believe it was just funded through the latest Caltrans Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant cycle. So a couple of regional opportunities for mitigation. And of course, as I noted with Rethinking Mobility, the city's transportation strategic plan, the city's already kind of taken a couple steps forward in terms of a more cohesive view of mitigation strategies in the city. So next steps on the implementation effort. So tonight we'd like to receive feedback from the Transportation Commission, and then we would eventually move the item on to the Plan Commission in August. And then because the thresholds of significance generally require an ordinance or a resolution for adoption by City Council, we will eventually get a City Council later in September. And with that, I think at this point, we'd like to open up to questions, unless Smadar, you had anything else to add to the presentation.
No, that was great. Thanks, Ian.
Okay, is there any public comment?
Actually, Mr. Chair, you might want to ask if the commissioners have any questions of staff.
I'm sorry. Are there any comments or questions from the commission? Jared? No. So I have one question. Do you think perhaps your data from March of earlier this year to now might be somewhat skewed because nobody's taking public transit, nobody's taking trains, and that that balance of ridership is going to change in the future. We don't know what.
The standard, or at least the guidance put forth by the State Office of Planning and Research for the definition of a baseline for CEQA purposes is to look at the VMT at the time that a notice of preparation is released. Now, under that scenario, if you released an NOP today, you would have a very odd baseline. And what we're seeing more in practice these days is that people are looking back to pre-COVID conditions for the purposes of establishing a baseline. Again, it gets back to making a good faith effort for CEQA purposes. And since we don't know necessarily what the future holds, we do want to go back to what we feel like is a comfortable baseline for defensibility purposes. It is a CEQA document after all and could be challenged in court. But generally speaking, that is what the industry as a whole is kind of motioning towards, is looking back to pre-COVID conditions. What we are also doing is looking at big data sources, some of which I've been sharing with city staff over these months, in terms of being able to look at conditions as we enter a new normal, and at what point have things begun to stabilize such that you may want to move past pre-COVID conditions and start moving forward. Every agency is going to be different in that, of course, but the onus will be on CEQA practitioners and city staff as we go forward to consider when it's time to reset baselines post-COVID.
Yeah, and I'll just go ahead and add to that currently CCTA has committed to updating the baseline for us every year, and that would be for all the agencies within the county. And so right now what we're looking at is the 2019 baseline, which was a pre-COVID condition. And so we'll see moving forward, you know, how that update proceeds.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. Do we ask for public comment now?
Yes, if you'd like, I can read the script or you.
Yes, good. You.
Okay, asking if there's any member of the public who wishes to provide public comments at this time. Please use the raise hand feature or press *9 if you're connected by phone if you would like to provide a public comment. And looking over to see if anybody is raising their hands. I'm seeing a nod of the head and no emails have been submitted, so it looks like we have no public comment on this item. So then it would return to the commission for comments. And there's, just to clarify, there's no approval or anything like that being requested tonight. This is just asking for comments and any possible direction to staff.
It appears though we have none.
There we go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That's a bang up job that it's all a-okay.
I guess so. It's
Thanks.
such an exciting topic, but Ian is always thorough, so good to go.
Okay, should we move on
It was
to?
good. We appreciate the presentation. Thanks.
Okay, should we move on to 5E, Sustainability Action Plan Phase 1? The city is drafting a new Sustainability Action Plan, which is based on our current Climate Action Plan, CAP. The new Sustainability Action Plan, the plan will continue citywide efforts to reduce greenhouse gas GHG emissions. It will include efforts to increase resilience to climate change related hazards, supporting a safer and more adaptable community. The plan will also advance other key sustainability transportation or topics such as equity, air pollution, water conservation, and water waste reduction. This is a typo, it's everything. This Transportation Commission meeting is during phase 1 of the project and will focus on presenting an overview of the project, draft vision statement and objectives, sustainability indicators, and data analysis results. Staff will provide an update on planned community outreach and engagement activities for this phase of the project. The commission is asked to give input on the draft vision statement and objectives, sustainability indicators, and data analysis results. Staff.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you so much. My name is Kara Batista Rao, and I'm the Sustainability Coordinator and Housing Analyst for the city. And I'll be starting off the presentation tonight. Next slide, please. So we'll do a brief overview of the Sustainability Action Plan project, our outreach and engagement plans, and the project timeline. And then we'll move into a portion of the presentation where we'll be sharing some information and data with you and taking your input kind of step by step. So that'll include the vision, greenhouse gas inventory and forecast, vulnerability assessment, and sustainability indicators. As I mentioned, I'm the project lead for the city, and we also have Sam Bowman, who's a city, he's been assisting the city as a Civic Spark Fellow through an AmeriCorps program. Our main consultants for the project is a team from PlaceWorks. Tammy Seals, the project manager, and Eli Crispy is the assistant project manager. They're here tonight to help answer questions, and Eli will do a portion of the presentation. So the city has an existing climate action plan that City Council adopted back in 2012, and it sets a goal of reducing emissions across the entire community 15% below 2005 levels by the year 2020. We have made a lot of progress on that, and we will share some data about how we're doing with our 2020 goals a little bit later in the presentation. So there's an opportunity to really build on the great work that we've been doing. And we also are looking to stay current with new state efforts on climate change. The state has set some new aggressive goals for the year 2030 to reduce emissions 40% below 1990 levels. The state's climate change scoping plan has some recommendations for what cities can set as targets for the future to address climate change. And then there is also a new state law that requires cities to address climate change adaptation and resilience when they do their general plan updates. And when we say climate change adaptation and resilience, what we're talking about is there will be more effects from climate change. So things like droughts and wildfires. And the idea behind resilience is, how can the city adapt and spring back or rebound to these kinds of hazards in a more stronger position in the future. So as part of that, in the future, we would have to prepare a vulnerability assessment to look at what hazards might affect us and then plan for different policies to help adapt to that different climate future. So in February of 2019, the City Council was picking their council priorities for the budget cycle, and they selected updating our existing climate action plan and expanding it to include new sustainability topics as one of their top council priorities. So the Sustainability Action Plan is going to encompass 3 different topics. It will update our climate action plan, and it'll include new strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It'll also include a new section on climate adaptation and resilience so that we're in alignment with state law. And then it is going to broaden our focus from beyond just climate change. So we'll be looking at other sustainability topics as well. And these can include topics like water, waste, equity, or other issues. So it's a chance to really respond to state law and some new opportunities. Next, please. And as has been mentioned tonight, the city has a draft Rethinking Mobility Plan. So the Sustainability Action Plan would kind of build on that. We would want to align the Sustainability Action Plan with this plan as well. So looking at doing things like using similar data sets, assuming that, or rather calculating the types of greenhouse gas reductions we can expect from the different strategies that are in this plan. And also trying to align different metrics that we're tracking over time for progress. So we'll be building off of the work that's been done for Rethinking Mobility. In terms of public outreach, we did have a lot of events planned for the spring that of course got canceled. So we've moved all of our outreach online, and our first virtual community workshop for the public will be on July 29th. For those who can't make it, it'll be recorded and put up online. In addition to tonight's Transportation Commission, we were at the Planning Commission last week, and we're starting to engage with different stakeholders as well to get their input. And we do have a project website, so walnut-creek.org/SAP has all of the information on the project and how the public can get involved. On the project timeline, this project is going to last about 1.5 years. We're in the first phase, which is focused on project initiation and visioning. And in this phase, we are, in addition to kind of looking at a vision for the project and raising awareness about how the community can give input and get involved, we'll be sharing some data analysis results with the public. During phase 2, which should last from summer to fall, we'll be focused on policy and strategy development. So really working with the community to come up with ideas and strategies and have a discussion about how to prioritize those strategies. And phase 3 in winter, that's what we're targeting, will be about preparing the plan, doing environmental review, and then adopting the plan. So we'll be kind of synthesizing all the information from the previous phases, drafting the plan document, and then working to adopt it. And during each of the 3 phases, we will have public outreach and engagement. So there will be commission meetings, city council meetings, and workshops for the public. So during the project, we'll be coming to the Transportation Commission during each of the 3 phases. And throughout the project, we'll be looking to you to help provide input on a number of topics, including draft goals and objectives, the types of policies and strategies, metrics for tracking progress, and then at the end to provide input and comments on the draft plan itself. So I'll just pause there and see if there are any questions about the plan overall before we move into the second half of the presentation. I can't see anyone, but doesn't look like there are.
Does anybody on the commission have any questions? Okay. Does any member of the public wish to provide comments at this time?
I'm sorry, we have a second half of the presentation before we get to that.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
All right.
Next slide, please. Okay, so this portion of the presentation, we're going to share some information with the commission and then ask for your feedback. So we wanted to start off with the draft vision and objective statement for the project. This was included in your staff report, so I won't read it, but it came out of a kickoff meeting with staff from across multiple departments, talking about what a sustainable Walnut Creek in 2030 might look like, what topics are included in sustainability. We then took this draft to City Council for their input. So you're seeing the revised version. And this will help us as we move into the next phase and start thinking about strategies to think, are these strategies going to get us towards this shared vision? So we'd like to, if you can go to the next slide, just get your input on whether this draft vision and objective statement seems to reflect where you'd want to see Walnut Creek's environment in 2030, and if there are any major topics missing. Next slide. And I'll pause here for questions before we go on to the next slide. Questions, then input.
Mr. Chair, I would want to clarify that your request that you withhold providing input until after hearing public comment, but now would certainly be an opportunity to ask questions of staff on this presentation.
How many more slides are there?
There are probably at least 20.
Oh, okay. I'll ask questions later.
Okay.
I have a question on the, I believe it was the vision, the previous, maybe 2 screens ago. It says a disaster-free Walnut Creek, and that's pretty much impossible to envision or provide or guarantee or even aim for. So it seems like an unachievable goal that we should not include in the vision. So perhaps we could rethink the word choice of mitigating disaster, limiting risk, something of that nature, even though it doesn't sound as good. Disaster-free is impossible.
Yeah, we can definitely consider that feedback. Okay, not hearing too many other questions on the vision. I'm going to hand it off to Eli. He'll be going over a number of different data slides with an opportunity for questions.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you, commission members. As Kara mentioned, I am going to walk over some of the technical work that we've done so far on the Sustainability Action Plan. And the first of these is the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. This is an assessment of the emissions that are attributed to Walnut Creek. In this inventory, we are accounting for the emissions from both community-wide activities, which are activities from residents, businesses, and visitors, as well as the emissions that are generated from the city's own municipal operations. There are 2 years that we are assessing greenhouse gas emissions for. The 2005 inventory, which is the baseline year that is in the existing climate action plan, and an updated inventory for the year 2017, which will show the progress that the city has made since 2005. These are the results of the community-wide inventory. You can see that emissions have declined 27% from 2005 levels. That includes an 18% decline in transportation-related emissions. The city's existing climate action plan has a target of reducing emissions 15% below 2005 levels by 2020. So at 27% below 2005 levels by 2017, it appears that the city is well positioned to meet and even exceed that adopted greenhouse gas reduction target. These are the results of the city operations inventory. This shows a 4% decline in emission levels by 2017 relative to the 2005 levels. There is one major caveat with this data. The 2017 inventory includes multiple sources of greenhouse gas emissions that were not included in the 2005 inventory. They are optional sources of emissions. They are not required under any of the guidance documents that we're following, but we have elected to include them because they do provide a more complete picture of the city's greenhouse gas emissions. For example, employee commute, which is the teal bar on the 2017 side of the graph, that makes up a pretty sizable portion of the city operations emissions, but was not included in the 2005 greenhouse gas inventory. The city has a goal of reducing municipal emissions 39% below 2005 levels by 2020. And while a 4% decline would not appear to be the right level of trajectory, if we only count the sources that were included in the 2005 inventory and exclude those optional ones that we have added in, then the city's emissions have declined by 35%. So that would put the city on a good track to achieve a level of reduction of 39% below 2005. With that, that wraps up the inventory side of things. I would be happy to take any questions on the inventory results.
Commissioner German, it looks like there's no questions from the other commissioners.
Okay, shall we move on?
Absolutely. With that, we can move on to the greenhouse gas emissions forecast, which looks at projecting emissions for future years. The forecast assumes that no action is taken to reduce emissions in Walnut Creek, the federal, state, regional, or local level. Those factors are accounted for later on in the process. So in the forecast, we're only looking at the changes in emissions that would result from the city's demographic growth, so adding new residents and new jobs. These are the results of that forecast. Again, assuming no action is taken to reduce emissions. Under this scenario, the city's community-wide emissions are expected to rise by about 1% relative to 2017 levels by 2030, increasing 10% above 2017 levels by 2050. And this does include about a 16% increase in transportation-related emissions. These are the results of the city operations inventory, which shows a similar pattern. If no action is taken to reduce emissions, the city operations emissions are expected to increase by 4% by 2030 relative to 2017 levels, and increase to 8% above 2017 levels by 2050. But of course, to say that no action is taken is a bit inaccurate. Action is being taken, has been taken, and in all likelihood will continue to be taken. So we do want to take those efforts into account. The Sustainability Action Plan will assess the greenhouse gas emission reduction benefits from these existing and planned efforts. the city will in effect be able to be credited for these programs, and they will help to bring the city closer to achieving its longer term reduction goals. These include the state efforts such as the clean car standards, the zero emission bus mandate. It also includes regional and local actions such as more bike lanes in Walnut Creek, increased adoption of electric vehicles by Walnut Creek residents, and cleaner sources of electricity that BART is using. We expect that even with the existing actions, some additional local efforts in the Sustainability Action Plan will still be necessary to achieve the city's greenhouse gas reduction targets. With that, I would be happy to take any questions on the greenhouse gas emissions work.
It's Jared. Are you guys going to go through like part of what is our plan to reduce emissions?
That will come at a later time, further on in the process. This is just the technical background for the Sustainability Action Plan.
So your predictions for the future move along what historically was going on, that people were using more public transit, well, so I say that that's not what's going on now. They're using less and less public transit. So do you see this trend continuing after COVID goes away?
It's a very good question. I don't know if we've seen, or if anyone can really say for sure what will happen after COVID goes away. I think that's an emerging area that's going to get a lot of study over the next few months. And I think we just sort of have to see where things shake out. I can't really speak to that right at this moment.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Seeing no others, I can move on to the next phase.
Okay.
The Sustainability Action Plan also includes efforts to improve climate resilience, and the foundation of this work is what's called a vulnerability assessment. The vulnerability assessment, as Kara touched on earlier, will describe how climate-related hazards such as wildfire, for example, extreme heat, and a number of others in and around Walnut Creek are expected to change. The vulnerability assessment will identify the populations and the community assets in Walnut Creek and around that are most at risk from climate-related hazards and how susceptible they are to harm. It is going to build on, or it does build on, a similar assessment that was prepared at the county-wide level. So we are ensuring consistency with Contra Costa County's efforts, but this assessment was tailored and made specifically relevant to Walnut Creek. So it addresses the issues that are of concern and are of focus to the community itself. The state now requires vulnerability assessments to be included in safety elements. So the city will be able to incorporate the results of the vulnerability assessment into future general plan updates to help meet that state mandate. These are the hazards that we are assessing in the vulnerability assessment. We are trying to focus not only on some of the more common kind of acute natural disasters, such as floods and wildfires, but we are also wanting to look at chronic issues such as air quality and drought, and make sure we have a more holistic perspective of the potential hazard condition in Walnut Creek. We are assessing 5 categories of populations and assets in the vulnerability assessment. And then within each of these categories, there are a number of specific population groups and community assets that are being included. So for each of the individual populations and assets in these groups, we assess their susceptibility to each of the relevant 8 hazards that I showed on the previous slide. So there is a fairly extensive set of results that come out of the vulnerability assessment. Although here just to focus on a few of the main takeaways, we do find that there are several populations that are facing increased health risks from climate-related hazards, damage to roadways, and concerns about vehicle access may be creating specific evacuation concerns for a number of residents, in particular senior citizens, especially seniors living alone, and persons with disabilities. We have found that a number of the buildings and infrastructure networks, such as roadways in the city, may be blocked or even damaged or destroyed by landslides and wildfires that can isolate parts of the city, and it can create a potential for service outages for any key services that depend on those infrastructure systems. The city's energy network, in particular the electricity lines, are highly vulnerable to damage from multiple hazards, and that can of course lead to power outages, and there are potential health and safety concerns associated with that. We have also found that some of the local ecosystems in and around Walnut Creek face a significant risk of harm from drought conditions. And we are asking the Commission to provide any input on any additional hazards or populations or assets that, in your experience, could be particularly vulnerable to climate-related hazards, as well as any questions on the vulnerability assessment.
Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Tim.
I'm wondering if you can touch on any more of the populations facing increased health risks and what you found in that research.
Well, absolutely. We have found that air quality impacts, air quality related hazards, and extreme heat and wildfire can exacerbate those air quality impacts that can create increased health risks for senior citizens, also young children, certain persons with chronic health conditions, and others who may face a sort of increased exposure to outdoor air quality. And this can include persons experiencing homelessness, as well as outdoor workers, such as construction workers. And I think I'd say in addition to those sort of general health related impacts, there are the more sort of acute risk of injury that can result from any number of natural hazards to pretty much anyone in the Walnut Creek community.
It's Jared. Are you guys, as you're developing further in the plan, are you accounting for resiliency efforts? Is that part of this as Public Works does additional projects, roadway repairs or building management? Are they looking at resiliencies? And have we, a lot of cities are talking about like resiliency shelters, places on microgrids. I don't know if any of that fits in here related to what you just talked about, right? Because if the wildfire comes and they shut off our power for 3, 5, 10 days, how are we preparing our infrastructure for that?
Absolutely. The vulnerability assessment looks at the resiliency efforts that are sort of in place right now. This is sort of a current point in time analysis as far as the community's level of resilience goes. That said, in the Sustainability Action Plan, we will be including policies that are meant to increase resiliency, and that can include some of those topics that you touched on that Public Works and others in the city may already be looking at and figuring out how to do. So we will certainly be syncing up with Public Works and making sure that their priorities and their issues of focus are reflected in this plan.
I have a question because you brought up the topic of wildfires and just going back to the greenhouse gas forecasting and modeling. How do increased expectations of wildfires impact our forecast for greenhouse gas emissions? I don't know if there is a significant release when there are wildfires. I imagine there would be.
There are emissions that are generated from wildfires. Currently, the state does not count those emissions. They're not included in the state's inventory, and they're not in the guidance documents that we follow. So we're not measuring in, or we're not assessing in Walnut Creek's inventory or forecast greenhouse gas emissions associated with wildfire, just because that method is not in place and is not recommended at this time. It's something that may happen in the future, just not here at the moment. We are looking at the other side of the coin, though, the impacts to the community that can occur from wildfires. So we are making sure that those any increases in the frequency and severity of wildfires are at least reflected in the vulnerability assessment and in the resilience policies. If there are no further questions, I will move on to the final section of the presentation, which is talking about a set of what we are calling sustainability indicators. These are metrics that will help Walnut Creek to track progress on sustainability topics. This will make it easier for city staff to monitor and report on the city's progress. These indicators will include topics that are related to greenhouse gas reduction and climate resilience, but they will also go beyond and include additional topics, such as air quality and equity, really again to create that more holistic view of sustainability in the city. We want to have the indicators be simple, streamlined points of data for city staff to track. And because of that, we are taking care to select indicators that are readily available, that are meaningful, and meet other criteria. So for example, some of the indicators and metrics that are included in the Rethinking Mobility Plan, we imagine will be also identified in the Sustainability Action Plan as a way for the city to track progress on transportation-related items. There are 6 topics of indicators shown here. Within each of these topics, we've identified a handful of potential draft indicators, along with sample implementation strategies and potential sources of data. But of course, none of these indicators have been finalized, and these are all open for feedback and review. These are examples of some of the potential draft indicators that would be associated with transportation activities in the Sustainability Action Plan. And again, we're trying to sync up with the metrics in the Rethinking Mobility Plan, and also trying to make sure that the indicators sort of capture, as best as can be expected for a handful of indicators, really the full spectrum of issues that are relevant for Walnut Creek. And so that takes us to the end of the presentation. As far as the proposed indicators and metrics go, we are certainly looking at any input that the members of the commission can provide. For those topics that I went over, particularly for transportation, we welcome the commission to consider any alternate or additional indicators, visions, or anything else that may inform the Sustainability Action Plan. So that is the technical background of the Sustainability Action Plan. And then in phase 2, which we anticipate beginning later this summer, we will be exploring strategies that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, enhancing community resilience, and supporting greater sustainability in Walnut Creek. So thank you very much.
Does anybody on the commission have any questions or comments?
Point of clarification, at this point, we're looking just for questions, and then we do have actually one person who's requested a public comment before the commission provides their comments. And Chair German, I don't see any commissioners waving their hands frantically to ask questions.
Should we go to the public comment?
If you'd like, certainly.
Does any member of the public wish to make public comments at this time? Please use the raise hand feature or press *9 if you're connected by audio only. If you'd like to provide a public comment, at this time, the secretary will ask if there are any members of the public who would like to provide comments.
And we have Carol Weed, who I think I've just turned on her microphone.
Hello. Yes. My questions, I had 2 questions, both related to the second section of the presentation. The first was the target date of SB 32 of 40% below the 1990 level of greenhouse gases. I understand the words and I saw the chart, but it doesn't give me a clear idea. Are we going from very, very bad to just maybe bad? So that what I'm wondering is there any comparison between, say, net zero emissions? When would, on that chart, we get, is that out into the next eon, or when, how do these things relate? And then I'll ask the other part of my question. The employee commute seems to add a really substantial teal bar. And I'm wondering, obviously, if we had housing where people who work here could live here would solve that, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. So I'm wondering, what have other cities done that has had a significant impact on their employee commute greenhouse gases? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Weed. Chair, if you would like to, you may wish to refer that question to staff to address for the Commission's benefit.
Thank you. Staff, can we get a response?
I'll tackle the employee commute question first, and then I'll hand the question about percent reduction in comparison to net zero and state goals over to Eli or Tammy. Cities, I'll just say that reducing emissions from employee commutes is very challenging. In my experience, cities have programs like commute alternative programs that provide incentives for transit, walking and biking, carpooling. You can do things like charging your employees for parking to disincentivize them from driving. And you can do things like encouraging your employees to purchase electric vehicles through perhaps, making them aware of different rebate programs. So it's very similar to what you might do with the public to get them to reduce their emissions from transportation, but it is a challenge. And it's something that we, now that we're aware of the emissions from commutes, we can focus on more closely going forward and as part of this plan. And then Eli or Tammy, would you be able to address the question about the state's goals and what net zero might look like?
Yes, absolutely. The state does have a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. They do expect that is expected to be a pretty significant reduction that will likely require a good bit of work and policy to achieve. So that is I would say it's a pretty meaningful goal, and it's one that is certainly consistent with some of the trajectory that's been considered by the international community in their greenhouse gas reduction goals. As far as a net zero goal goes, the state has a non-binding goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2045. I think the state is still looking at how that might be most effectively implemented. It's a relatively new goal, so we will have to wait and see what the state has in mind for that. Walnut Creek does have flexibility in choosing its own targets for the Sustainability Action Plan. So while Walnut Creek will have to be generally consistent with what the state has, with the framework that the state has established, the city certainly has some flexibility to choose the targets that are most appropriate and are most in sync with the desires of members of the public, staff, decision makers, and so on. So I think that will be another phase of the Sustainability Action Plan process, will be identifying the appropriate goals.
And Mr. Chair, there are no other public speakers, and we've not received any correspondence.
Okay, does the commission have any more comments or questions?
And I can also add that what staff is asking for from the commission tonight is to give input on the draft vision statement and objectives, the sustainability indicators, and data analysis results, if you have any for that. This is not the plan's not up for approval or anything.
How do you account for residential increase in solar, like on all our homes, and personal purchases of electric vehicles or hybrids?
As far as the solar goes, every amount of electricity generated by a solar panel means a comparable amount of electricity that is not purchased from MCE or PG&E. So when people install solar panels on homes or businesses, we see a corresponding reduction in the city's community-wide electricity use. So that's we are able to account for the reduction associated with that. And we can look specifically at how much electricity is being generated by solar panels in Walnut Creek, because that information is made available by the state. As far as electric vehicles go, we do, the state DMV does keep records on the number of electric vehicles that are registered in each community. So we are able to track that. And then using a combination of state and county specific data, we are able to identify the average greenhouse gas reductions that occur from transitioning from a conventional vehicle to an electric vehicle. So that does get reflected in the Sustainability Action Plan, and it will show not only the progress that Walnut Creek has currently made through increased electric vehicle adoption, but also the level of reduction that could be achieved in the future with even greater EV adoption.
So I'm curious about something you just said. How much electricity in Walnut Creek is generated by solar now?
I don't have the specific number in front of me. Are you referring to electricity from solar panels in Walnut Creek, or
Yes,
solar energy? As far as solar panels in Walnut Creek go, again, I don't know the exact number. I imagine it is somewhere in the single digits. That would be pretty consistent with what we've seen from many other communities in the area. But it is a pretty rapidly growing number. So I'd expect that to go up in the future.
Do you have say an amount of growth over the last 5 years?
We do have that data. We can certainly get those numbers. I just don't have them in front of me at this time.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Sam?
You had asked for some feedback on potential transportation metrics, and in looking at the list you've proposed so far, I'm grateful for this. And one thing that I think that seems a lot to me is looking at usage of last mile or last 2 mile type transit to access our downtown and kind of core area. That might be something worth looking at as well.
Thank you.
Down here, it's so walkable, it's just a matter of getting to the downtown area, to the core. And then you can get so much done on foot. So it's, I'd like to look at that.
Yeah, we can look into that further. And this will be a little bit of an iterative process as we go into the next phase and come up with strategies. And we'll kind of hone in on what would you want to, track to see those strategies and the progress. So we can look at that further.
Thank you.
I have some comments. I think it's really great that we're thinking in an integrated way about sustainability. I have a little bit of a concern about scope creep. So before, when it was a climate action plan, it was very focused on climate change and addressing that. And when I think of sustainability, I also think about the economy and social factors. And of course, everything is intertwined, and that's how we should think about sustainability. But I just worry about for this, as we develop this vision as a community that it could start to feel very, very broad and be more difficult to define success metrics when it just becomes so broad. And I think you want to make sure that you have really clear performance indicators to measure the success. So I don't know if there's a way to specify environmental sustainability or something along those lines, because I think that's kind of where you're focusing, just reading between the lines a little bit. And then in terms of the vision statement, I would just encourage the project team to really think boldly and at a high level. I think in the current statement, and I know that this is going to go through a lot of engagement with the community. I'm not going to get too into details about specific word choices right now, but some of what's currently in the vision feels like it's starting to get into the tactics and not staying at a high level. So for example, efficient multimodal transportation, renewable energy resources. I feel like those are some of the tactics that we use to get to what we're aiming for in what I would maybe consider to be our vision. Because there are other things like, how do we conserve more energy rather than just moving it to renewable sources? And so I would just think very boldly with our vision. And I know that it can be hard, and the more feedback that you get on things like vision statements, the more convoluted it can become. But I encourage the project team to really think about how we keep it aspirational, because that's really what a vision is meant to achieve. But I think it's a really solid start. So great work on that. Another aspect is, and I think this is implied in here, but really thinking about the land use impacts. And as I think about transportation and how much land is dedicated to vehicles, whether it be residential garages and driveways or parking spots and streets, and the number of lanes that we have on our streets, I think I see that as potentially part of the transportation indicators. And then I also would encourage us to start thinking, I mean, we have this opportunity with COVID-19, and we've seen a fairly dramatic reduction in traffic that's been relatively sustained. I mean, it's ticked up a little bit more recently as the economy has opened up a little bit more, but there are some challenges because people are more fearful of things like public transit. And I think that's a challenge that we'll have to overcome. But there's also an opportunity to see how we can think more innovatively about how we work with businesses, and with how big of an impact commutes can have on our goals, our greenhouse gas emissions and things like that. Can there be some sort of incentive or encouragement for local businesses to think about retaining some remote work so that people aren't necessarily needing to go to the office 5 days a week, because that can have such a big impact on people's commutes and quality of life and climate effects, and just the frustration of sitting in traffic. So those are my comments.
Anyone else? Should we move on to the next item? Thank you, staff.
If I could just ask staff for this item, if there's anything else in particular that they need from the commission.
No, I think I appreciate all the comments and feedback you've provided us so far. I think the next phase there'll be more to engage with. This had a little bit more of a presentation of data aspect, but we appreciate all the thoughts and input, and we'll see you again in the next phase when we'll be talking more about potential strategies and again, talking about some of the metrics for tracking progress. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, should we move to 5F? Support of safe routes to BART grant application. The city is applying for the Safe Routes to BART SR2B grant to improve pedestrian safety, pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure at Ignacio Valley Road and North California Boulevard intersection. Staff is seeking commission support through a letter of support signed by the commission chair.
Thanks, Chair German, Smadar Boardman, traffic engineer. So I will share my screen right now and we can get, can I get added to share my screen again, please?
And there you go.
Thank you. All right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so today I will be presenting our application for, or rather just an overview of what our application is going to kind of entail for the Safe Routes to BART grant. So we'll go into some background, kind of how we got here, a little bit of funding information and the requirements for the grant. I'll show you the preliminary concept plan and then we'll talk about next steps. So just for some background, this money is coming from Measure RR and was approved by the BART board for use specifically for this program. It was $25 million. The focus is on active access to the BART station, so active modes, walking, biking. 5 million have been made available for this cycle, and we will see we're looking for kind of improvements that make it safer and easier for all BART riders to access the BART station. So just for some background, back at the end of February, pre-COVID times, BART did announce that they were going to be doing this funding round. And then in early March, we went ahead, we had seen that this was an opportunity, and we looked to add a Safe Routes to BART capital budget project funded through TIF so that we could get matching funds on the table so that we could go for this grant funding. Then in March, we sent you a memo because we didn't actually meet back in March, but it was part of the fiscal year 21 capital budget, that single year budget. There was positive recommendation to council, and then council adopted the fiscal year 21 capital budget. So just some funding information and requirements. Each agreement, so how much money BART would award potentially is somewhere around $500,000 to $1.5 million. This only covers the cost of construction, so it does not cover the cost of any environmental review that might be required or design. It does require a 30% match, which cannot be used with staff time in kind. So that's why we did allocate the TIF funds specifically to get this match together. And then it does also require 35% design plans, along with, an application that includes demographics, a few other things too. So here's kind of our existing conditions of Ignacio Valley Road and California. And here you can see, so this is our busy intersection with lots of pedestrians trying to access BART. Can you all see my cursor?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. That's going to be helpful for the next slide. But BART's over here, just to get us oriented. North is towards up. BART's up here on the northwest corner. And then we've got Target here on the southeast corner. A lot of times you'll see pedestrians use this access easement over here on the backside of Target to come up to the intersection and cross. And then we do have some small pedestrian refuge islands that exist right now, along with crosswalks that kind of accommodate pedestrian flow through the intersection. So this is our proposed design. What we were really trying to do here was incorporate, first of all, recommendations that came from the North Downtown and West Downtown specific plans, which look to close off this channelized right turn here from vehicles. It is a very low volume right turn. And so we do believe that this is not only consistent with what that vision of that plan was, but that operationally it would have little impact to vehicles, and the benefit would really be towards pedestrians and cyclists. The actual design of the intersection might look a little funky. This is what's called a Dutch intersection or a protected intersection. They're very popular in the Netherlands, and they're becoming increasingly more popular in the United States. There's one in Davis that got implemented a few years ago, and then Fremont actually recently implemented a few of these as well in the last, I think, month or two. And so what we're trying to do here is really accommodate that bike flow coming from California and getting them across over to BART and around. This would also include some additional pedestrian improvements by widening up or providing additional space for pedestrians on these islands. Again, this would be, the southeast corner would be expanded quite substantially. And then again, on the southwest corner as well, it would also be expanded quite a bit compared to the existing conditions. And then on this northwest corner, we really wanted to try and get vehicles to slow down. And that's really the intent here, is we wanted to slow vehicles down as they're making these right turns. But the thing that's kind of difficult about this intersection is not only do we need to accommodate, pedestrians and bicycles, of course, and that high volume of them too, as they're accessing BART, but we also wanted to make sure that we continue to provide access to trucks as well as buses. So we really took a keen look at all of these turning movements, ensuring that trucks and buses were still able to make those maneuvers. And we can always, during the comments and questions section, we can go back to this kind of overview, but I just wanted to give you some idea. And there's some light striping changes as well, just getting into the approach, because we were just trying to take advantage of as much space as possible. But the goal here is we're reducing pedestrian crossing distances, which also means we're reducing pedestrian crossing time, which also means that you could end up with like a little bit of a operational improvement for vehicles. And that's just a benefit as a result of really benefiting the pedestrians. So our next steps, we need to finalize this application. It's due on Thursday. So we're really coming up on a deadline here. We're looking for letters of support, and what we're doing here is we really want support from Transportation Commission first and foremost. And then we'll be going to the mayor, city manager, Walnut Creek Downtown, a few other people, looking for those letters of support to provide improvements to access of BART. And then just some finishing touches to those 35% plans, and then some other required information just for that application. So the recommended action that I'm requesting tonight is that I get support from the Transportation Commission for the chair to sign a letter of support supporting this project. Okay, so I'm ready for any questions or comments.
How many bikes, cars, and pedestrians go through that intersection? Whether daily, weekly, whatever you may or may not know, or can you tell me later if you don't?
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but what I will say is, comparatively to any other suburban type intersection, which truly from a geometric standpoint, this intersection really kind of meets. We have a very high volume of pedestrians and bicycles here, and that totally checks out. It makes sense. We've got a BART station right there, and that's the access point that people are really getting through to access the station from the downtown. So it's pretty substantial. Normally you would see at a similar type of intersection, or perhaps further down the way on YVR. YVR itself carries about 70,000 or 50,000 vehicle. I'll get back to you on that number. It varies per segment, but it carries a lot of vehicles. Don't get me wrong, but you know, you might see the number of pedestrian crossings in a single hour further down the street, not by WCI, for example, but maybe further down by the hospital or something like that at like 25 pedestrians. And that's because the hospital sees a lot of action. This intersection, it's more like in the hundreds for pedestrians in an hour, or 100-ish.
Can you go back to the slide of the proposed design?
Sure. Can you see that?
No.
Oh. Okay.
You have to reshare your screen.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. There you go.
So I guess it's the northwest or northeast corner by Target.
Oh,
Why is there no pedestrian island there? I don't think you really said. See, on all three other corners, there's a safety island for pedestrians.
Yeah, so sorry, that probably wasn't super clear. What we're trying to do is we're actually going to fill this in completely. So this whole area would be for pedestrian. It would all be pedestrian area, whether it be a sidewalk or something else. Yeah.
So there's a lot of construction going on in BART these days. Is the opposite corner of BART, is it going to stay the same, or how will it change?
Yeah, so we're actually, you know, that would be part of phase 3 of development at BART. The current construction is phase 2. There's not going to be any additional frontage improvements at this corner as part of phase 2, just so you know. Phase 3 is several years down the road. And at that point, you know, we can see what we can do to get BART, or, you know, that phase 3 developer to come help and do any additional improvements at this frontage. But for now, this would be consistent with the circulation plan that BART has in place for the long term.
Okay. Sort of disorganized question. When I commuted, I never went to the Walnut Creek station. I went to Pleasant Hill station. So are there bikes really coming down Ignacio Valley Boulevard?
Yeah, so, you know, Ignacio Valley Road actually doesn't have, we do have what we're calling class 3 kind of bike route where you can share the sidewalk. There is actually on the northeast side of the intersection. Technically, this block does have a class 1 path that's shared use, multi-directional for pedestrians and bicycles. The North Downtown Specific Plan does envision a class 1 path that runs along the north side of Ignacio Valley Road, at which point, you know, we could come back in and we could kind of revise this design to accommodate to a bike flow through the intersection. But we are working with a pretty limited budget with the BART matching funds. So we're trying to do biggest bang for your buck. Just so you know, it's not likely that we're going to be able to afford putting in real concrete islands that are raised. We're probably going to take this as more of a quick build approach. So it's more of a near-term solution, using really sturdy bollards and some very established, you know, using paint or something else, but really established pedestrian areas and very clear markings for bicycles as well. But we would physically separate it using something like bollards.
Okay. Yeah, that seems like it'd be great for pedestrians. Are there any other questions?
I was just curious to better understand why we would be retaining the 3 other channelized right turns. Is it a necessity based on traffic? Is it because it would, if we took them away, it would widen the pedestrian crossing too much? I'm just trying to understand that better.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's actually kind of a combination of both of the things that you were talking about. So operationally speaking, this northwest corner, it does have a dedicated right turn lane. We really need that right turn lane. There's not much we can really do about that. again, operationally. The northeast corner and the southwest corners, operationally, like we don't necessarily need those right turn, that dedicated right turn area. But what I will say is that, as you had pointed out, if we were to try and fill that in, it would actually increase the pedestrian crossing distance. And mostly the reason for that is because we need to accommodate those truck turns and those bus turns that I had mentioned before. And so that really kind of messes with our geometry. But yeah, typically the goal for complete streets, at least Caltrans has talked about this before too, several years ago, is you really want to square up the intersections. And so anytime you can remove these free right turns is a good thing, because you're removing that uncontrolled conflict of a vehicle with a pedestrian who's crossing. But again, it's truly, it is a really difficult constraint to work around when you have to deal with these heavy vehicles, as opposed to in like a more downtown environment where you have a lot more leeway there in terms of your design vehicle.
Great, thank you.
I do have a question.
I do. I'm
ahead.
sorry, were you calling on me? Okay.
Dan was first.
So the corner that Jamie was asking about, that's across from BART. Yes, thank you. So that has heavy bus and truck traffic. Don't most of the buses that are going to BART come down and now turn into I don't know, the area farther down Ignacio Valley Road? I'm just curious because, you know, if that's a place where we're encouraging bike traffic and would like to encourage even more bike and alternative forms of travel down that road, it might be worth, not that I'm a traffic engineer, but revisiting this corner, if possible.
Yeah, so that corner, you're right. It's not necessarily the buses who are coming in. Sorry, actually, I think the flow is that they're coming, and Andy, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think they are coming in and up, turning onto Pringle. Is that right? And then they turn into BART and then make that left turn.
No, the buses are coming from YVR going.
They are coming from YVR. Okay.
Right turn into the entrance into the BART station that's right before the freeway. When they're exiting BART, they're coming around Pringle.
Right. Thanks, Andy. So you're right. This corner doesn't need to accommodate the bus turns necessarily, but it does still need to accommodate some of our bigger trucks like WB40s. Just because California is a truck route, it's a designated truck route in the city, as well as Ignacio. But that's a good point. Usually the WB40s have they are able to turn a little more easily than a bus, just because the bus is one solid piece versus the truck kind of has the front of it and the back, the trailer. So we can take another look at this corner and see if we can slim it down a little more. But even so, we're still going to have to accommodate those truck turns. So the benefit would really be perhaps reducing this crossing distance just a touch more.
Okay, thank you.
Andy, do you have a question?
I do. Sminar, you mentioned that this is probably going to be more of a quick build type improvement. Do you have an estimate then, if things went your way, how quickly this might be actually installed?
Yeah, so BART has a requirement that we would, if we get the funds, I believe we have to get it built no matter what within the next 3 years. All that said, I mean, if it is quick build, it's probably going to be a much quicker turnaround. Obviously, the sooner we can get this in, the better, especially as traffic volumes are low. So construction would be a little easier. But we'll have to see, if we get the funding, first of all, but we are going to have to go through that design process. So that's going to take a little bit of time. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair, I don't see anybody else. Any other commissioners waving their hands? You might wish to go to public communication or public
Okay.
comment.
Does any member of the public wish to provide public comments at this time? please use the raise hand feature or press *9 if you're connected to audio only. If you would like to provide a valid comment at this time, I will ask Secretary if there are members of the public who would like to provide comments.
And
Mr. Secretary?
let me check the email inbox. We have no comments, no public comments.
So does this item require the commission to vote, yes, we do want to sign a letter?
Yes, it would take a vote, and the city attorney's office has asked that we do roll call votes when we do votes. So it would take a motion second and a vote.
I'll motion that we move this to a vote.
I'll second it.
And thank you
Yeah,
for
who's it?
engaging on this and working toward this for us. It's an important project. It's an important intersection.
So Commissioner Cahill and Chair German both said second at the same time. Care to draw straws as to who's the seconder?
No, she can have it.
Okay, and then I'll go ahead and take the vote here. Commissioner Cahill?
Aye.
There you go. Commissioner Ash?
Aye.
Commissioner Salcido?
Aye.
Vice Chair Milks?
Yay. Aye.
And Chair German?
Aye.
This is unanimous.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And really quick, I just wanted to say thank you so much for supporting this project. We're really excited about it. It's a very impactful intersection. It's really a gateway to the city. So we're hoping that it'll be a strong enough application and that we can get funding this cycle so we can go ahead and implement this. And then just a little shout out to the team who really worked very hard on putting this together and dealing with my craziness, with my crazy ideas. So shout out to Carlton Thompson, who's our senior civil, Rashad Culver, who did much of the CAD work, or all of the CAD work, and Matt Rudman, who also has been making a huge effort on the application itself, and Ozzy Arce as well. So thank you again.
Okay. Item 5G. Transportation Commission appointments. This item is placed on the Commissioner's agenda annually to provide the Commissioners an opportunity to consider committee assignment and balance their workload. The following are the current Transportation Committee appointments.
It looks like we copy and pasted into the agenda something without the table. I can go ahead and take over since I'm the staff for this item. So as you all know, there are basically 3 committee assignments that come to this commission. The first one's for the mayor's quarterly breakfast, and that automatically goes to the chair and vice chair for the commission. And those quarterly breakfasts so far have been postponed due to the COVID pandemic, and I heard as of today they're still trying to figure out what's going to happen for the next quarter's breakfast. So it means you won't have to be at City Hall at 7:45 a.m. until those things start up again. Then we have the the Contra Costa Transportation Authority, that's CCTA, their Citizens Advisory Committee. So that is actually an appointment by the City Council. However, our City Council has asked that the citizen would come from the Transportation Commission. They're basically looking for one of the commissioners to fill that role. Once this commission votes for that, then it goes to the City Council for them to make the official appointment and notify CCTA. And then lastly, and that position had previously been held by the former chair, Ken Strongman, who's now a planning commissioner. So there's a vacancy there. And then lastly, we have the Shared Mobility Working Group, which has been somewhat dormant as of late, again, really related to the COVID pandemic. But they had been, currently it's Commissioner Vice Chair Milks and Chair German, and they've been focusing on shared micromobility, but think like scooter share, bike share, things like that, working primarily with Ozzy Arce on coming up with a new program and regulations for that. And I believe both Vice Chair Milks and Chair German, you've indicated to me that you're interested in staying in that role. So those are the three. Well, really, there's two. The quarterly breakfast, you already took that vote when picking a chair and vice chair, but looking to fill the Citizens Advisory Committee spot, and then looking at those two positions on the Shared Mobility Working Group.
Do you guys want to stay on the Shared Mobility Working Group?
Yes, I do.
Yes, I do.
You want a motion on that?
Sure.
Or we could
might
just
need-
go with a single vote for all the positions.
Okay.
So I don't see anybody else jumping up wanting to try for the Shared Mobility Working Group. We do have this opening for the Citizens Advisory Committee for CCTA.
I'd be interested in that if nobody else is, or I don't know, David, if you are or what.
Well, given a milestone on the, what's the initials for it again, Andy? Transpac Committee.
Oh, yeah, you're on the Transpac. The bike. God, I can't remember. There were so many committees in transportation.
Yeah. You can never remember the initials of it. Jared, if you are interested, I would like to nominate you for it.
Sure. Thanks.
And would you like to extend, are you making a motion to nominate?
I'll make a motion to nominate Jared for that committee.
And would you be including in that nomination or that motion also nominating yourself and Commissioner Vice Chair Milks for the Shared Mobility Working Group?
Danny, is that okay with you?
Yes.
You have to string your over at the meetings.
And then I guess be looking for a second.
Second that motion.
All right, I'll go ahead and take a vote on that. It's the list here. Commissioner Cagle? I'm sorry, was that an aye?
Yes.
There we go. Commissioner Ash?
Yes.
Commissioner Saucedo?
Aye.
Vice Chair Milks?
Aye.
And Chair German?
Aye.
And let me just, I know I was just clarifying all this, but the motion was from Chair German and the second was from Commissioner Ash?
Milks.
Vice Chair Milks.
Yes.
Okay, simple enough. I can always just watch the video later. All right, thank you.
Okay, item 6 is commission and staff brief announcements or brief reports on their activities. Do we have any?
I do from staff, but if the commissioners have anything.
Just on a personal note, I really would like the bike trail between Heather Farms and the BART station, the Pleasant Hill BART station, to be resurfaced sometime, because some really fast bicycles came toward me about 3 weeks ago, and I flew my tricycle bicycle off the road. It's still in the shop.
Is that the Contra Costa Canal Trail you're referring to?
I think so. That's the one that runs behind Heather Farms to the Pleasant Hill BART station. Yes.
Yeah, and it intersects with Iron Horse Trail. I can pass that along. I believe that trail is maintained by East Bay Parks. There's like 3 different jurisdictions involved in those.
Okay.
I can forward that on to the appropriate parties.
The road rash is in sealed.
Thank God for that. Well, if there's no other commissions have anything, or commissioners have anything to report, actually, I don't have anything other than to say, boy, these Zoom meetings are awkward. And this was a long one, and thank you very much for everybody's efforts on that. Sminar Boardman actually has asked me if she could jump in to provide a brief staff report on something she's working on.
Hello again. Okay. Thanks for listening to such a long commission meeting. I guess this is what happens when we all don't meet, but
Yeah.
It's all been good stuff. So just a couple things I just wanted to, bring your attention to. As you've seen, the Rebound Program, we've been working on converting street space and parking spaces for use for outdoor dining or retail sales. I don't think we've actually gotten anything for retail sales quite yet, but it's all been very much so successful. Some of the outcomes that we're really looking for on the traffic engineering side here is that part of this is we're really intentionally trying to give as much space to the businesses. Meanwhile, we're also effectively creating a traffic calming situation by really narrowing down a lot of the pavement that we have in the downtown on the streets. And so lots of learning lessons and lots of learning lessons based on the sensor data that we also have for parking. So this will be really interesting, information, and I'm sure we'll be presenting to somebody or other about kind of what we've learned here. But it's been a really great and fun process. But I just wanted to shout out that the traffic engineering team has been working very hard along with traffic maintenance from Public Works to get these installations in place. And then of course it's a super coordinated effort with city manager's office and planning and code enforcement. So I just want to let you know about that. We've also been looking at signal timing since COVID hit. I didn't really get the chance to kind of let everyone know about what we were doing in regards to signal timing. When we first had the shelter in place orders come out, we switched all of the coordinated traffic signals. So basically YVR, Treat, California, we have many intersections that actually run in coordination along certain corridors that are really intended to provide a nice flow for commuters, which was not anything we needed to serve at the time. So what we did was we actually pushed everything into what's called free. And what that does is it really serves kind of more side street traffic as well as pedestrians and just cycles people through a little more quickly. And the intent of that was really to get more people, more access, people leaving from the neighborhoods to go to some of the essential businesses and do that kind of thing. We did originally, well, it's still in place right now, but I think this is something we're going to have to change since there have been some rollbacks. But we did, we've gotten a lot of feedback, positive and negative, from residents and users of the streets about vehicle delay or not. And so we did make the decision. We have been monitoring it via some data. We have been tracking travel time, especially along YVR where we have that information. And we did turn on the coordination again on July 6th. So after the holiday weekend. And then that's when things kind of started to change again, especially this week with new orders coming out. So we're probably going to push everything back into free again, or at least consider all of the downtown corridors probably don't need to be running in coordination because we don't need to accommodate that freeway overflow traffic that we usually have to battle. So that's kind of where we're at. It's kind of been very like touch and go, and it's a lot of iteration. But we've been, Matt Redmond from my team, who you heard from earlier today, he actually presented at MTC talking about kind of our operations. And we had a survey that went out because we were just trying to find out best practices and what our neighbors were doing and what people across the country were doing. So it's been a pretty extensive effort. And I think every agency is kind of in the same place as us in terms of what they can or can't do and how quickly they can respond to these changing traffic needs. But just wanted to give you a heads up about signal timing and how it's kind of just in flux, and we're just doing the best we can to implement what we think makes the most sense to benefit the most people.
Thank you. Okay, any further comments on the question?
I know it's getting late and we probably all want to go, but have you made a lot of any considerations around pedestrian signal timing, actually having hit the button versus having it automatically come on, that kind of a thing?
Yeah, so we had gotten a lot of requests for that. It's really tough. Some people were asking for it to be automated based on sensor, like using sensors, and we don't have the infrastructure for that. But what you can do is you can tell the traffic signal to just do the PED phase every time. We had to think about that long and hard because there are certain locations where makes sense because you have enough pedestrian traffic and it's okay to kind of turn the traffic signals around like more often. But we have a lot of corridors like Ignacio Valley Road that you have a high volume of vehicles, and especially speeding vehicles right now, just because of how easy it is to get around. And so we didn't want to trigger a pedestrian phase every cycle and then have them think, oh, the traffic signal is broken, I'm just gonna go. And that would result in, potential crash. So what we did do was we actually did turn on pedestrian recall at the intersections with the class 1 trails. So there's 4 Contra Costa Canal trail crossings that are signalized. And then there's the Iron Horse Trail kind of weird crossover at Newell and Broadway. And then we have one other just like high pedestrian crossing intersection, Lincoln and Broadway, which also kind of has a connection over to the Iron Horse Trail. So we had put those on pedestrian recall. As part of the July 6th effort, we actually pulled it off of pedestrian recall. But I think we're probably going to need to put it back on recall, which means just to call the pedestrian phase every time. You don't have to push the button. And actually, as part of that, we did put up signs that kind of said, we push the button for you. We put together like a cute little poster just to let people know. But we don't think that it would be like, I definitely see the benefit to not having to push the button just because of, the safety concerns from like a health perspective. But it's also really tough to try and, implement that given the types of streets we have. So it's just definitely a concern. And that was part of like the outreach efforts that we had made with that survey and asking around, like, what have you done? What are you doing? And just kind of finding out what everyone in the industry is really doing. So we feel good about the trail crossings. We've gotten a lot of feedback on that, mostly negative, but some positive. We actually had flipped at Oak Grove. We actually flipped the phasing so that the green for pedestrians was always on the trail crossing. And then if a car came to the intersection, that would call the green. So we kind of made some extra efforts just because we know that there's been so much pedestrian and bicycle activity, much, much higher than we would typically ever see. So we're just trying to accommodate that flow.
Sminar, can I ask, you might not know this, but the pedestrian call buttons, citywide, have they all been swapped out to like the big kind that you can just nab with your elbow instead of having to push the little button with your finger?
I think, yes. There might be a few that are kind of the old, like bullnose type, but it's still a big button. There might be a couple locations, so don't quote me on this, but I think generally speaking, most of our intersections have kind of those bigger buttons that you could elbow, or I often knee them. I'm not gonna lie, use my knee and just kind of get it. So yeah.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you for that. I might follow up with a few questions just on that. Because I feel like psychologically as a driver, if the little man walking sign is always on, psychologically, it kind of makes you a little bit more aware of, I feel like drivers should always drive as though there are pedestrians. You know what I mean? But
yeah,
we'll talk about it more offline.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do I see any more questions or comments? Does anyone want to move for adjournment? You just want to keep
Sure.
there all night.
I'll move it.
Second.
I'll second that motion.
We are now adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Oh,
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Manohar.
Commission meeting in